His name, Lee Sklar. He's an up-and-coming bass player in this crazy world of Hollywood. We wanted to get him on the show today to give him a little exposure and try to get him on some records. He's only played on about 2,000 albums and toured the world with the greatest, most iconic musicians, songwriters, pretty much ever. He loves Sunset Sound. I've been wanting to do this for a year and a half now since we started this show. Lukather put me in touch, and here we are.
I'm thrilled to be back here.
I know.
This is great.
You hail from Milwaukee.
Yes.
I'm from Indiana, Chicagoland area.
Midwest boys.
Yes, sir. What brought you out here?
Well, we moved here when I was going on 5 years old. So my roots in Milwaukee aren't that deep. You know, I'm pretty much a San Fernando Valley kid.
Yeah.
But my tie to Milwaukee at this point is Daryl Sturmer, the guitar player from Phil Collins and Genesis band. He's from Milwaukee and still lives there. Oh. So when I get back, I get my fix of Milwaukee just hanging with Daryl.
Do you like Los Angeles?
I love L.A.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, as Randy Newman said, I love L.A. Yeah, I can't, you know, the joy for me is that I've gotten to travel the world doing what I do. And every time I come back here, I'm happy to be here. I mean, there's aspects of it like any other place that you kind of look at. I'm looking at the street scene coming here today, and it's not the world I grew up in. But my fondness for Los Angeles and what it has to offer from the standpoint of theater and food and just energy and stuff, it's really great. But then you turn on the news and you look at flooding and freezing and hurricanes and tornadoes, and we're pretty blessed here with weather. So
we are. I love LA. I moved out here 17 years ago.
Okay.
Left, went to Florida one time. I was like, it's still warm and it's cheaper to live. This is 10 years ago, probably.
Yeah.
I lasted about a year, and I'm like, yeah.
It's
Florida. It's so hot, so muggy, all snowbirds.
Muggy kills me, man. I am not a humid person. I really like cold. Actually, yeah, I'm kind of come from Eastern European stock, and I mean, it's funny. There's a video with Phil Collins where we were doing the Today Show, and it was wintertime back there, and you're out on the plaza outside of the NBC studios there. And Phil and the band's like 50 layers of I'm still in a T-shirt on the thing. And it's like everybody's going, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "Yeah, it's just my blood. That's the way I am."
Yeah, and also Hollywood. You know, it's a little scuzzy. It always kind of has been since I've been here, obviously. But places like Sunset Sound, the Troubadour, Chateau Marmont. You know, certain music venues that are still going.
Yeah.
You walk in them and it has an energy, and you feel like, you know, it's 1978 sometimes, especially Sunset Sound.
Yeah.
When you step in this iconic studio, you know, 65 years, started as Disney, what do you immediately think of? We walked in right now into Studio 3, and you're like, wow, as soon as I walk in here, a million stories come to mind.
Oh, God. I mean, this was like a second home, you know, for most of the players I work with. We spent so much time here. I remember being here, we did all of the early Rita Coolidge and Chris Christopherson records over in
Studio
1. Jimmy Webb here, Corey Wells from Three Dog Night. Every room has like stories to me and in history, and there's a weight of history, and then all these memories. Guys like Izawa, who's like one of the biggest Japanese, you know, rock gods. We did one of his albums over in 2. Our band, The Section, did work here, and all the engineers that have come and gone through here over the years, guys like John Haney, and it's magical. I did Manhattan Transfer here, you know, all kinds of projects, and you know, you walk in and it is kind of a time warp. There were very few changes at the studio over the years. Maybe the bathroom got upgraded and things like that.
Once.
Yeah, but you walk into the rooms and it's really the room you were in. But every time I walk in, I just kind of go, wow, this is deep. And I'm so grateful that it's still here because so many are gone now. Mm-hmm. And it really breaks my heart that the history of this industry in this town has been kind of denigrated over the years. I think United is going to be bulldozed down, from what I understand. That building's going to be razed, and they're going to put up an office building or something there.
That's a travesty.
That was the first studio I was ever in this town in 1967. and seeing those things go away because they'll never come back.
Yep.
Nobody's going to reinvest in a new studio. So keep this goddamn place going here.
That was my goal. One, a bassist I work with all the time. I hit up every great bassist I know also to get a question from you.
Yeah.
Pino Palladino, I texted Sean Hurley, I texted every bassist, and I was like, I got Lee Sklar coming in, and I want a question from you to ask him, which I'll get to. But, when I came here, I was at MTV, and I came over here to Sunset, and I was recording music here, and I just talked to the owner about missing revenue streams and cool stuff. And then I started seeing, like, David Foster come in, and he'd tell a story, and I'd sit there and listen, and I was like, this is incredible.
Yeah.
And it'd be, the guys from Earth, Wind, and Fire or something would come in, Verdine White. He'd tell a story. I'm like, why are these not documented?
Yeah.
And also seeing Capitol go away, United, and these other studios, it's like these need to be put down in a book, but it's modern, so let's do like a podcast kind of thing. It's just so special because even when I sit in here and produce or play on a session or do anything involving these rooms, there's not a day I'm not excited. There's not a day I don't come through that gate and look up at the sign and I'm like, this is fucking awesome.
Yeah.
There's nothing like it.
No, it's really it's in your DNA.
Yep.
If this is something that you've historically followed or anything, and the minute you walk in, you go, wow, it's real.
Yep.
I mean, I'm sitting here right now, and there's an artist I work with named Judith Owen. She's married to Harry Shearer from Spinal Tap and Simpsons. And we're sitting here talking, and I'm looking. Russ Kunkel's drums were right here.
Wow.
Lenny Castro was right there,
Love
and Waddy
him.
Wachtel was right here. I mean, I close my eyes, and I'm in that space, and I see everybody here. This complex really creates that kind of a vibe here that it puts you on your A game the minute you walk through the gate.
Yep. That's what Steve Lindsay was saying yesterday. He's like, you, Steve Lindsay, Lukather, have done so much tremendous work, but for you to come in this place in 2023 and still have a little bit of excitement and intimidation and motivation to just do your best. Why is it the history that brings that out of you, or is it just the energy of a place?
The vibe. This place has a vibe about it. You look and it's that funky old studio. I mean, it's that look. That the studios we grew up in this town have this kind of a look to them, and you walk in and you start to think about how many different people I've worked with that I've seen in this room, and there's like this energy and spirits floating around in here that never dissipate, and it's magic to me. It saddens me on one level because like I said, so many of these kind of places are gone, but also that there's like a generation, or at least one, maybe two generations now of musicians that will never experience that.
Yes.
And to me, that's the thing that got all our juices flowing. You go through the bullshit drive here and you're stuck in traffic and you get rear-ended on Los Feliz on your way to work, which happened, and all this stuff. But the minute you go in that gate and the minute you hear the buzzer and that gate opens up and you walk in, it's a different energy that hits you. I love it. To me, this is intoxicating.
Yep.
And it really makes you appreciate what you've done and got to do.
But also, that's why I want to keep this place open for another 65 years. So a whole new generation of artists, musicians can come in here and just write. I got Miley down here for a one-day little project to honor Janis Joplin. I toured her around. I'd been asking her to come down forever. Columbia Records called the next morning and booked months, and Zach, who's engineering this session right now, worked on that, and she wrote her whole record.
Oh, that's great.
And she did Flowers, and that's the biggest song ever. It broke every streaming record on Spotify, and her record, Endless Summer Vacation's up for 6 Grammy nominations. Miley's amazing. She's a pop artist, but even for someone like that comes in with writers and a band and just sits in here and absorbs the rooms and absorbs herself and the energy, like her best stuff ever was done here, but also when you look on those walls out there, which you played on a lot of those records, like Jackson Browne, all his greatest records, Van Halen, all their greatest records, Prince, his greatest period in this room,
3 is an amazing room, but 1 and 2 are also amazing rooms too that have that same vibe in them, and that courtyard out there watching really shitty basketball players trying to make hoops out there, and stuff. And it just exudes this thing that really words can't describe. You know, it's one of those things you have to experience. And then if you've had the history here, when you walk in, it like boom, it comes right back to you again.
Yeah.
And that to me is magic.
And for someone like you, who has been here throughout the decades and seen it transform, you know, you've probably sat out in that courtyard and it's been like Elton John and Cher out there,
Yeah.
and Rita Coolidge. And I saw Michael McDonald the other day. He was playing a festival and we were talking backstage, and I just went and introduced myself because, you know, they did 6 records here.
Yeah.
And he's just immediately excited, you know. And
Yeah.
I'd never met him before, but he was like, "Oh, I love that. I saw the Lukather and the Steve Porcaro interview, and
Yeah.
he was, you know, that's exciting." And I was like, "Well, we got to get you to do that."
Yeah, he would be great.
Yeah.
He would be great to come in. Yeah, I mean, everybody, it's one of those names. You say Sunset Sound, and it is so iconic that anywhere in the world, like if I'm talking to people in Europe or I'm in Asia, anywhere on tour, and people start talking to me, and if I ever mention this, they, oh, yeah, it's almost reverent to them. This is like the watering hole kind of vibe to them, and that's a remarkable thing to have, because it's not just brick and mortar. It's a different thing.
And the thing that's so romantic, and then we'll move on, is that it's a father-son operation. You know, Walt Disney and Tutti Camerata started this in '58 just needed a place to do some Disney tracking.
Yeah.
You know, one room. And then they went public in '62. Bruce Botnick walked in off the street at 19 years old, I think 18, and said, "Hey, I'm just got out of engineering program. Do you need any help?" Mm-hmm. And he did 6 Doors records and was in there with Janis Joplin when she left the day she died, and worked on Doobie Brothers stuff. And, you know, he's still engineering to this day.
Oh, Bruce is great.
Yeah.
He's
You've worked
wonderful.
with him before, right?
Yeah, many times.
Speaking of rooms, but yeah, and to stay, you know, the longevity of this place, just being 2 guys, you know, and Tutti Camerata passed away. Now he's an amazing composer, label head. His son took over and he runs it today. And that's special. Those things kind of don't happen anymore.
See, when I'm recording, I hate not having an amp.
Big time.
Bass. I don't want to just be listening in earbuds or headphones. So when I'd work in that room, if they really didn't need it for anything else, I would go into that ISO booth with my amp, and I can see the drummer, I can see everything. I don't need to be in the same room. It's actually nicer for me not to be in the same room with the drums, you know, fighting that against the phones. But that was kind of my favorite room, where I know in one, like when we were doing Christofferson and Rita, that as you're walking in, there was the ISO booth on the side, and that's where they were always in that. And I was sitting right in front of them, so I could just turn around and look at them. And it was usually, I think Sammy Creason was the drummer on most of that stuff. And he was set up across, so I could kind of be watching. I was sort of in the middle of all that. And Mike Utley would be on piano or B3. And it was really great. Jerry McGee, that's all coming back here. It's weird. I haven't thought about this in ages.
I mean, just when you say 2 sentences, I have 40 questions that come to mind.
Well, Chris was great because he would a lot of times play 12-string on things, because he played so hard that by the end of the song, he would be a 6-string. He'd be breaking strings. And his way of relaxing, he liked having a case of beer and a bottle of Tia Maria. And we'd all look and go, really? Wow. He was a fabulous piece of work. And David Anderle produced all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I worked here with David a tremendous amount of times.
Yeah, Jackson Browne. And then, well, let's start off with the first question.
Yeah.
Do you always stay strapped with a BB gun?
That was in 2.
Yes.
That's where it happened. That was Jimmy Webb, I think. No, we were doing Randy Edelman, his album, and Fred Mullen and Matthew McCauley were producing that. And yeah, for some reason, I ended up with this little pellet pistol. It was kind of like an air thing, where you could crank it down and you would just put a little thing in and pop it. Well, we're in there, and I was doing some overdubs, and Fred's driving me crazy. I love Fred, and I've worked with him on many things, and he actually worked on our band's first album with us. But he was just driving me nuts of doing some overdubs. And I finally he had just gotten a cup of coffee, and he's standing there, and I reached down and I pulled out the pellet gun, just a bam, and blew the coffee cup out of his hand. And he freaked out and ran out, and then I finished doing my thing. I've still got that pellet gun.
Oh my gosh.
But we would sit in there and we'd go, let's see if we can hit that light. Just everybody liked playing with that. It was just Wasn't a toy, but it was just a funny moment. Like Luke loves to talk about that.
Yeah, he
And
emailed me this morning about it.
yeah, it was great. But still got it. I'll
Incredible. I mean, was it the Wild West though? Like when the stories Luke's telling, he's like, Lenny Castro had a ninja sword that he brought out. We almost got in this, jail room brawl in the courtyard, and Luke's on the PA system, and they got a Winnebago outside, and there's blow everywhere. I mean, was there just
everything is predicated on the project. Some of the people were real maniacs, and there was always scenes going down. But for most of the guys I knew, everybody's pretty much a real hardcore pro.
Sure.
I mean, when you come in, it's time and money. You don't want to dissipate the creative juices with distractions. It's one thing like when you're working with Willie, he's going to be out in his bus, and they're going to open the door, and there's this waft of smoke coming out and all that. But that's how they function when they're working. Most of the time when I was here, we were really focused on the projects. I mean, everybody was great and relaxed, and there was moments of just hanging and fun and all that. But in terms of like ninja swords and all that stuff, I would tend to think that probably like with Luke and that original lineup of characters, because I worked with Jeff all the time. I love Jeff Porcaro.
Yes.
Those guys were all pretty nuts and really living hard on that. But I know the thing that would always happen, though, is the red light comes on, and man, dead serious. I always kind of equate it to Harpo Marx of the Marx Brothers, where he would be this zany character of them, but in any of the footage where he plays harp on it, all of a sudden this serenity would come, and he would be this musician, and then he would be goofy all these cats were like that. I mean, they're all these complete casts of characters, but the minute that red light came on, it's like this thing happened, and then everybody was in the zone, and the recordings would go, because you want to capture things fast, get it while everybody's still completely fresh in the moment and not thinking distracted. I did probably one of Luke's first recording sessions. I think he was 19 when we started working together. Always a challenge on these things, especially in the old days, because he could go so left. But the minute that light came on, he was one of the best players in town. So
the power of music.
He's an amazing cat.
Have you played with Brian Wilson ever?
Yeah, I did Orange Crate Art with Van Dyke Parks and Brian Wilson. I think I did work on one of the Beach Boys projects.
Well, my question for that is, one, that's amazing, obviously, but two, there was a doc called Long Promised Road, which Jason Fine from Rolling Stone produced, directed. Cameron Crowe's involved, Atticus Ross, Jim James. Mm-hmm. And Brian's older now and has some health issues, but when he sits down at the piano and puts the headphones on, it's like he's 19 years old again. I mean, he is so clear and has direction and talks better. And just the music that goes into him, it almost heals him in some way.
Well, it does. Music does that. I was just listening to a thing on the radio when I was driving to something the other day, and they were talking about dementia and Alzheimer's and music.
Yeah.
And it was really these people that are so far gone, but the minute they hear some music that was part of their lives, they're suddenly coherent. They're singing along with things. Or if they were a pianist, they're sitting at a piano kind of playing it, yet the minute the stuff stops, they kind of fold up and they're back in this thing. But music has such a remarkable, I guess there's an element of healing, but there's also just a cathartic thing that happens with it that it can affect you on so many levels. I mean, that's one of the things that I've loved so much over the years is when I meet people, like when we're touring and things like that, and they come up and they go, what you've played on is like the soundtrack of my life. Mm. And these songs mean different things to people. Sometimes it's marriage, sometimes it's death, divorce, births. And these are like benchmarks for them. And I go, I'm exactly like you. I said, even the stuff I played on is the benchmark of my life. And I sit there and I can remember what I was going through when we were in the studio. And there's a clarity that can come to me when I'm talking about studio days and who I was in the studio with, and talking about the record plant and RCA and Gold Star and all these rooms that I was fortunate enough to spend my whole life in, as soon as I'm in that space, boy, it's like this little fog dissipates and it becomes clarity at that point. And for somebody like Brian, I'm sure the minute he sits at the piano and he's encapsulated, he's hearing the music just in his ears and he's not really being affected by the what's going on in the room or anything like that. I think there's probably just at that point he suddenly is in that space again. And the minute he's got to be in this world, that's where his challenges come, is just dealing with what's going on around him.
Yeah. Also, when music's released, it's really not the artist's song anymore. It's kind of whatever the listener interprets it as, That's why I like lyrics that don't make sense, but also kind of little things you'll pick up on and you apply them to something in your life that day. It's going to affect you differently than it'll affect you, or maybe you interpret it differently. And it's like, it's this thing, this sound that we can just kind of keep safe in our heart and our memories and our mind. And I have that with a lot of songs. There's songs that I just know that if I put that on, it's going to take me back to the moment my father died, or I listened to that at that certain point, or it came on the radio and really hit me.
Yeah, I had a friend. He's one of the top musicians in town here, guitarist. But we were playing the Universal Amphitheater with James Taylor, and he came to the show, and I talked to him like a couple of days later, and he said, I was sitting there sobbing during the show. He said, I felt emotions, and he said, I went home that night and told my wife I want a divorce. He said, it welled something up. He said, I'd been going through a really bad time with her. It wasn't really working, but it was like this thing that gave him focus, and it empowered him to go do what he felt he had to do. And he said, if it hadn't been for that show, I might still be miserable and making her miserable.
Yep.
So it's weird, but it's also our senses are remarkable. There's things you'll smell, like a clover that maybe was growing in a field next to a house you were in when you were 5 years old. And if all of a sudden you smell that, you're 5 years old again. Even if it's for a moment, you just there's this thing that happens. And music can do that. You hear a couple of notes of something, and for an instant, you're like transported to the first time you heard that. And I'm that way with the band Vanilla Fudge. The first time I heard their first album, it blew my mind. And I remember I had an old panel truck at that point, and I was at a party, and I wasn't digging this thing, but I had the panel truck all fixed up. I had a little stereo system in it, and I was parked down the street, and I said, I'm out of here. I went in and I just kind of laid down in the back and turned on the radio, and that album came on. And when I hear that, I'm right back in that panel truck. And that was probably 1968 when that was going on, or 67, or something like that. So there's these triggers that can happen. And that, to me, is that same trigger is what happens when I walk into this property. Is no matter how different the street scene outside this building looks from when I was first coming here back, 50 years ago, as soon as I walk through the gate, it triggers all those things again, and this kind of weird little endorphins start to well up, and each corner I turn, I visualize something that went on in here and different people I knew, and the thing that's to me now is so many are gone. And so it's almost like a time capsule. You come in, and the fact that they're no longer present, they're present in here.
Yeah.
So I really embrace it. I take it all in. Dick Wagner, when we did the thing for St. Jude's Hospital, after we played in this room, and I remember Elliot Easton was sitting right here from the Cars, and I was sitting right behind where I am right now. And it was like a room was packed with like the top people in the business doing this big, huge song for St. Jude Hospital. And then I talked to Dick afterwards, and he was proposing us putting a band together and doing all this. And then he passed away right after that. And I just sit there and I go, I was in the room when they were doing the choir part of this, and he was standing right here, and I feel his presence still right here from that, because it's a presence beyond just being there. These people have a thing about them that's bigger than them. It's hard to describe, but their presence is, I feel it all the time. Corey Wells, who's no longer with us, was one of the
Incredible.
members of Three Dog Night.
Sure.
And we were in two, and I was just sitting there going, I love this band. I've always loved the band. And I got to do a Japanese commercial with Chuck Negron and stuff. But Corey, to me, really had like the pipes. And we're suddenly in there, and I'm just going, I'm still fanboy.
Yeah.
So when I get to work with any of these people, there's a part of me where I feel like we're all together in this, and there's another part of me where their history is so poignant. To me, it was such a part of my upbringing. Listening to the Three Dog Night songs and all that. When I'm around them, there's a little corner of my psyche that's going, "Wow, it's just a trip. It's really him."
Do you remember the first session or time you came in here? What year it was, or record you played on? Or track, overdub?
It might have been the first Rita and Chris album. I think that was probably, at least that's the one that really sticks to my mind. I mean, it was lots after that, but that would have been like either Rita's solo or Rita and Chris, because we did a lot of records with them as a duo and other stuff with her as a solo artist.
I love her.
Oh, she's great. She's still great.
Yeah.
And Chris is wonderful. I really love Chris too. So I would tend to think that might have been it. That was probably around 71 or 2, something like that.
Well, you know what? To honor all the iconic female artists of 65 years here, I just did a record and this documentary called Women of Sunset. And right. I brought in modern artists, and that's actually what Miley came in for, to do cool. Janis Joplin. But I brought in modern artists to recreate, rearrange, and pay tribute to all the female iconic artists of this studio, and get back in a room and look at other band members and remember this is how it was done, not building on a Logic session. Whitney Houston's background singer, her name's Charlotte. She's incredible. And I said, I want you to come out front now. She was with on the Grammys this year with Stevie Wonder, and I said, I want you to sing the lead. And she said, I want to do We're All Alone, which is such a beautiful song. Well, Boz Scaggs was in here, and he wrote the song. This is like, I don't know, 2 months ago probably. And I told him the story, and he was like, that's incredible, And it's like, that's what this show's about, just kind of paying it forward and documenting things. And, I want young female singers to hear that song in a modern variation, but then also go look back at, Rita's version.
Yeah.
And the story behind it, how Boz wrote it. Do you remember that song playing on it?
Oh, I remember it, absolutely.
Wow. So you did play bass on that track.
Oh, no, I loved it. I mean, we would do stuff. I mean, like Booker T would be playing keyboards on stuff, and maybe Cropper would come in. And it was really great because David Anderley was he was a great producer and kind of a great hunter-gatherer of talent. So he would put together these really great combinations of players to work on the things.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I remember that. I mean, all the stuff I did with Rita was always fun. She was, to me, was the next generation incarnation of Peggy Lee. Had that kind of honey voice, It's like there's no rough edges on it. It's smooth and silky, and just also just good people. So it was always a joy to be around them. There was an element in those days that was almost like guerrilla recording, because there were few rules. Because what started happening then, this is kind of what we're going through with our band, The Immediate Family. There's a documentary film that Denny Tedesco, who did The Wrecking Crew, has done one about us, which premieres on the 12th, next week.
Wow.
Magnolia ended up buying it, and it's an amazing film. And
Incredible.
It's about our group of guys, Russ Kunkel and myself and Danny Korchmar and Waddy Wachtel, from back at the beginning in the 70s with James Taylor. But there was a thing that happened where you had the Wrecking Crew, and then all of a sudden there was this completely paradigm shift of how recording was being done. From those people would come in, there'd be charts in front of them. They were amazing, amazing musicians. But for the most part, they were given charts. They could throw, like Carole King would throw an idea in that could change the song completely.
Yep.
But when we started working, it was really, people were hiring us just to come in and be us. And a lot of times there was no charts, there was no nothing, and it was a different thing. So there was a guerrilla aspect to it, where we were all kind of making the rules on our own. We weren't coming in with a setup of how things were going to be.
Yeah.
So it was an adventure every time, and that's, I think, the thing that made it so interesting. There was never a kind of cut and dry, here's how we do it thing. So you'd come in and everybody be kind of just vibing with each other, and we might go in and set up and go, oh, drums might be better in that corner. That's kind of different.
That's amazing.
Reflection in there or something.
The freedom.
So, yeah, it was really a freedom, and especially in those days, the budgets were there, so nobody was like, looking at their watch, kind of, come on, we got to get going here. You could take time to really let something evolve and develop in the studio, and out of that, a real camaraderie and a trust between players happened because we were making things up as we went along. We weren't looking at a piece of paper and one take through and you're done, move to the next thing. It would be like, play that again, I want to hear that. And then I'd maybe go with it was like Waddy played something or Cooch played something. I'd say, let me hear that. Find a bass part that works with that. And we weren't being pushed out the door. So we spent really an incredible amount of creative time in these walls. And that was one of the things that to me was so exhilarating every day was you'd come in and your ass was on the line. You really had to come up with the goods. There's no like, I don't feel it kind of a thing. You really had to do it. And some of the most creative music I've ever been involved with happened during those periods of just everybody just, this thing would happen in the room. And it's again, it's one of those things you can't verbalize. You just had to have been there for it. And it was analog world then. I mean, the feel of looking on the walls and seeing the tape off the console with, the song is on there and it's got a list of like drums, bass, and all the things on it. And the amount of boxes of tape that would be piling up in there. You just go, somebody's going to have to listen to this at some point and deal with it. And so you'd work on some projects, it could be 200 boxes of tape by the time they finished 6 months in the studio
4.
Easily.
I have a picture of Toto 4 and the tapes laying on the ground in Studio
nuts.
2. It's just hundreds of tapes.
Oh, it was great. I remember.
Stones, too, Exile.
Well, we were in the studio with our group, The Section, and we wanted to do an edit on there, on one of the songs. And that was back in the day of pulling out this 24 track or 16 track and putting it in the editing block and cutting the tape, and it's hanging there. And we did it, and we went, I think it went better the older way. Went to get the tape, and it fell and went through a crack in the floor, and there was no way to retrieve it.
Holy.
And we ended up having to relearn the song with this weird timing edit that was in it because there's no way we were going to be able to fix this and not recut it again. I mean, it's just like crazy stuff would happen, or when a machine would throw tape, and all of a sudden it would break, and that machine's cranking. All of a sudden, this tape is like flying off the reel. And then there's the second engineer trying to wind it back on without damaging it, and it was great.
We still do, not a ton, but like when the Black Keys come in, they recorded tape.
A lot of people are still excited about it. Or they heard about it for so long that they decided, if it was possible, let's cut to tape. I know with Phil Collins, when we were in the studio, we would cut basic tracks to tape and then dump it over into Pro Tools or whatever, so that they could do all the editing and whatever, vocal comps or anything is a lot easier in the digital format. But for basic tracks, drums, bass, keyboards, we cut all that stuff to tape, and then we would sit and listen back and go, oh man, this is good. It's really good.
I know you've talked about James Taylor so much on so many interviews, but
I'm happy to talk about that.
Where did you meet him? And then you came in on Mudslide Slim and the Blue Horizon. That was the first record you played on, correct?
Yeah.
Where did you first meet James?
Well, in the late 60s, I was in a local band out in the Valley called Wolfgang. And our main manager was Bill Graham, the great Bill Graham. And Bill's real name was Wolfgang. And we thought, what better way to suck up to your manager than to name your band after him?
I didn't know that.
Yes. It was still one of the best bands I've ever been in. We ended up cutting some demos, and that was about all that ever happened with us. But our drummer, his name was Bugs Pemberton. Bugs was English. We had two English guys, and Bryn Howarth and Bugs Pemberton were in the band. And Bugs had a friend named John Fishbeck. And now John Fishbeck owned Crystal Recording Studios down on Vine Street in Santa Monica.
Yeah.
And he did all of Stevie Wonder's early records, Songs in the Key of Life and all that. And he still is, he's in New Orleans, and he's still engineering down there and producing. Well, he had a friend from childhood who had just gotten back to America from England. And John would come and hang out at our rehearsals with us. We had a house out in Sunland, and the band house, and we would rehearse out. In fact, the very first time Wolfgang ever performed on stage together, we opened for at Winterland for Led Zeppelin.
What?
It was our first gig, was playing with
What
Zeppelin.
year?
69.
Holy
68,
cow.
69. And so John would come and hang out at our rehearsals, and at one of these rehearsals, he brought this friend of his. Well, it was James Taylor.
Oh, shit.
And James had just gotten back from England after he had done his English Apple album for Apple Records.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's all convoluted how these things happen. James and Danny Korchmar were childhood friends, and they spent summers together on Martha's Vineyard, and so they knew each other from teenage days. And they had a band called the Flying Machine, and they worked in the Village. Well, when it wasn't happening, James said, I'm going to give a shot and go to England and see if I can get anything together there. And Danny said, if you're going over there, look up Peter Asher, because Peter Asher was half of Peter and Gordon that came over with the English invasion and all that stuff. They would get pickup bands when they came to America, and the band would learn their couple of tunes that they had, and they would do it. Well, at one of those pickup bands, Danny was in it, and he and Peter became fast friends. So they were connected. So Cooch told James, he said, when you get over to London, look up Peter. Well, at that point that James was there, Peter had just been made head of A&R at Apple Records.
Yeah.
So James called him, and they got together, and he played him some songs, demos and stuff that he had done. And Peter just said, you're incredible. I love your playing. I love your writing. I love your singing. You want a record deal? And James said, please, I'd love one. And so they went in the studio in England and cut the Apple album there. Then when they came back,
He was getting clean from heroin at this point too, right? Wasn't he on getting clean from heroin?
no, he was totally strung out still at that
during
point.
the Apple period.
Yeah, he was strung out through most of the 70s.
Gotcha.
Not necessarily on heroin. He got kind of strung out over the years on methadone, which is supposed to help you quit, but that became an addiction too. And he had his issues. But the thing that was remarkable with James is no matter how basically at any given time how fucked up he was, he could play perfectly. He never forgot a word, never hit a wrong chord. The minute he would sit down, like walking into the studio, or like Brian Wilson sitting at the piano, the minute he would start doing what James does, there was total clarity. He was in the moment, never fucked up. And then when he would be done playing, then he would go fuck up his life, whatever. I remember him saying when he finally cleaned up, he said he gained about 20 hours a day. It's like at that point, because it was pretty bad. When I met him, they had just finished recording his James Taylor album for Warner Brothers, and Peter produced it. And it was Danny Korchmar on guitar and Russ Kunkel on drums, and the piano player was Carole King in the band. And I think Bobby West played bass on a lot of that album, because I hadn't met them at that point. And they were getting ready to play a gig at the Troubadour, and Peter was saying, I want to get the band from the record, but we really need a bass player. And James had just been at the rehearsal, and he called Peter and he said, I found my bass player. And they tracked me down and they said, would you like to play this gig? And I figured it'd be one show with him, and it turned into 50 plus years. And we just hit it off. Everybody it came together. And during the course of our early touring in those first year, unbeknownst to really her, James at a certain point told the audience, he said, Carole's an amazing songwriter. Carole, why don't you play some of your songs for the audience? And she's like, really? And she ends up playing a few songs, and the next thing you know, she's in the studio cutting tapestry. And, here's one of the biggest albums in history. Because she was, as a teenager, had like a profound career. She and Jerry Goffin, her husband, they were one of the great songwriting teams out of the Brill Building. And, with, Burt Bacharach and Hal David and Neil Sedaka and all these people.
Jeff Barry.
And all of a sudden, there she is on stage doing her thing. So she had to leave finally at that point because she had little kids and she had her own career happening. And I was doing an album. I think we did it over at A&M, but it was Tom Jans and Mimi Farina. And Mimi Farina was Joan Baez's younger sister. And so I got hired to do their album. And when we're in the studio, there's a keyboard player on it named Craig Durgee. And I had never met Craig before. And I contacted Peter at that point. I said, I think I found Carole's replacement. And so Craig came in and they loved him. And so he started playing with James. And it's all these things are so weird. And we'd be on the road and James didn't like to, he liked to more do like a line check. He didn't want to like waste a lot of time doing sound. So he'd come in, do his sound check and would split. And we were all just horny players. We just wanted to play. So we would just jam all the time. Okay. And our front of house mixer, Buford Jones, who worked with Shoko, started recording our jams, and he gave it to Peter Asher. And one day Peter calls us aside, and he goes, "I want you to hear something." And he plays us, and we go, "That's great. What's that?" He goes, "That was your sound check." And so he got us a deal with Warner Brothers at that point. Now, we never really had success and James named the band The Section. He said, "Well, you guys are music, you're The Section, so just call it The Section." And we said, "Fine." Because I don't give a shit about names. So many stupid names became iconic, household things after a while. But we had a great time, and then we ended up opening for James on his tours, and we opened for Jackson on his tour. So we would be the opening act of the show, and then we'd come right back on afterwards and play with the artists. So it was this whole package thing. It was really great. And James and Jackson's management would talk to each other, so there was never a conflict of schedules. We would come off of one of those guys' tours, and we immediately go in rehearsal for the next tour and go back out with those guys again. Same with Linda Ronstadt. And the first time we all really toured together as the group that is now the immediate family, which was Danny and Russ and myself, and then Waddy Wachtel joined us, was on Carole King's Thoroughbred album, which was her follow-up to Tapestry. And so these things are all kind of floating around, and boom, they keep coming together. And it's been one of those things where I love that aspect of it, where you kind of effortlessly things come together. When I was in Wolfgang, we went in the studio with a producer named David Rubinson up in the Bay Area, and we cut demos. That was the only time I had ever been in the studio, ever. Then ended up meeting James and starting, because actually before James, the first record I ever worked on professionally was an artist, Brian Hyland, who did Itsy Bitsy Teensy Weensy Yellow Polka Dot.
No shit.
But I think we did Sealed with a Kiss was a huge hit, and I played on that. Russ and I were both on that record, and Del Shannon, the great Del Shannon, was the producer on that, and that was just before I started recording with James. So that was actually the first professional session. But the weird part of this whole career thing was James was like the perfect artist for something new happening in music, the singer-songwriter movement. Even though you had Dylan and all these people, and Phil Oakes and all these people during kind of the folk era, what came next was different. And James was like the figurehead, spearhead for benchmark for this whole thing. Because one day nobody knew who he was, and the next day he's on the cover of Time magazine. And they're talking about this is the new movement in music. And we're just right there with him. So we got kind of brought into this. One of the most profound things for us was that Peter Asher put our names on the album jacket. That had never been done before. And so when labels were starting to sign singer-songwriters because of the success James was having, they would look at the album and they go, well, if these guys are good enough for James, we should call them. And all of a sudden we went from no studio experience, basically, to being the first call guys in town and having to figure all of this out, suddenly ending up in rooms like this and trying to figure out how to record, because we were band guys. We were just playing gigs, not in the studio. And to me, before that, it was the Wrecking Crew people, and that was you never thought you could play at that level of these people. They were like the premier studio musicians in the world.
Yeah.
And for me, the fortunate thing was the perfect time, so that when we got into the studio, those people were still working. So I ended up on lots of records with Hal Blaine and Larry Knechtel and Mike Melvoin and Jim Gordon and all the people that were the Al Caseys and Dennis Budimirs and all them. They were all became friends, and then their careers didn't go away, but they slowly slowed down, and ours got momentum. So there was this transitory period that took place.
The session players, the Wrecking Crew especially, even Steve Lindsay was in here yesterday. We're talking. He goes, I wanted to be a singer-songwriter artist, but when I went with my dad, Mort, who was a great composer.
Mort Lindsay, yeah.
Yeah. And I went to Capitol Records, and I saw the session players coming out and pulling up in Porsches, had the sunglasses on. I went to my dad and I said, I want to be those guys. Because the session players in the 50s and 60s were the coolest fucking guys
I was
ever.
in a band called Group Therapy in 1967, and we were produced by Mike Post.
Oh, wow.
And we weren't allowed to play on our record. That was the first time I was ever in United Studios at United A.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting on a couch looking through the window. We were allowed to sing on our record, but we weren't allowed to play on it. And I'm looking, and there's Hal and Carole King and all of those people. And I'm in 1967, and I'm going, holy crap, this is another world. And then finding out that they were playing on Sinatra and the Beach Boys and the Association and the Mamas and the Papas and all this stuff. I'm going, I could never do this. Yet 3 years later, I was working with them every day. So it's
the momentum.
It happened so fast that there's no, because I get people over the years that have always said, I want to do what you did. How can I do it? And I go, I have no idea.
It's the momentum.
Because it just happened.
You just start.
Yeah, you're in the right
it.
place at the right time. It's a perfect storm. And the fortunate thing is the door opened and you had the goods.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people that have opportunities come, but they couldn't back it up.
Yep.
Or maybe they had the chops, but not the personality, or the
drugs.
There's so many things come into play in this world. That it was one of these things. It's just been a remarkable journey, and I kind of pinch myself every day, and it really comes to a head. I don't feel it so much when I'm sitting at home and people are sending me files nowadays, and I'm doing stuff from home, which really only came about because of COVID. I had never recorded at home. I don't have a home studio, and I had never done anything at home prior to COVID. But I had people starting to say, "We'd love you to play on this," and I'd say, I really don't do that. But usually I would, tell people, if send me files, and I would go to a friend's house who had a home studio. But none of us were seeing each other anymore. And this one person called me about a project, and they ended up, they had a connection at SSL, and they ended up sending me a 2+ interface. And then I called Steve Postel, who's one of the members of our band, and over the phone he gave me a tutorial on GarageBand. And so I've done like 18 albums at home now.
GarageBand,
just using GarageBand.
No shit, unbelievable.
But the drag of it is to me, the thing that I enjoy about this is the camaraderie in a studio. So when I'm sitting at home, just coming up with ideas and stuff, it's great, but I'm not affecting anything other than me.
Yeah.
I like being with a drummer. I like being with a guitar player, a keyboard player, and kicking ideas around and working on a song where you go, bridge, needs a bridge. And then the band ends up creating a bridge or an intro. The guitar player, the artist has come in and they just play a thing, and you go, this kid really needs some setup. And that's what the band would do. That's what the studio guys do, is they come up with that stuff, even though they don't get points or credit for it or anything like that. So many songs I've worked on that became huge hit records. If you saw what the artist came in with, it has nothing to do with what the band ended up creating for them. And that only happens when we're all together. If I'm sitting at home doing bass parts, only thing I'm affecting is bass. And then half the times they're saying, well, kind of ignore that because we're going to replace all that. And you're going, well, I'm responding to it because it's what I'm hearing, and you're saying that's not going to be there.
Exactly.
It's a weird format now. I like working though, so I don't say no.
Yeah.
But it certainly isn't my go-to way of making records.
Back to being successful and things starting off, because also there's so many musicians that are either at USC or Musicians Institute or coming here and are 18 years old, and they're scared, about being a musician, or is this the right career path? But it's really the power of manifestation and thinking positive and working hard. Work ethic is 80% of it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Even I've talked, Alan Sides is in Studio 2 today.
Oh, great.
Obviously gigantic studio owner, legendary engineer. And I asked him, I said, what's the key to success? He says, my work ethic. It's like I want these things, so I work. And then it's never the path that you think or the way it's going to happen. It just kind of appears somehow, or you meet this person and you never think it's just like the journey's the destination. Don't worry about where you're going. Just worry about today.
You just enjoy every moment.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like Warren Zevon said, enjoy every sandwich.
I love that.
But it's true. It really is true. It's that journey that you take, because things are going to come up throughout that whole thing where you're going to be going like this, and all of a sudden you go off that way or this way, but you thought you were going that way. And it could be right or wrong. You don't know. But it behooves you to, just follow instinct in your guts and
stay away from narcissistic people. That's another thing. When I surround myself with very positive, motivated, interesting, creative people, that rubs off on me. It inspires me. When I'm around people that are just complaining all the time and don't want to be here and it's too long, it's like, then that affects me as well.
Oh, totally.
Especially in a studio, it's like,
if you feel that way, don't be here.
Exactly.
There's other people that want to be here, so make room.
Yeah, exactly.
I hate it, man. When I'm around players that complain, he's just kind of do hot tarring in August in Atlanta. Go up on a roof and do that. Tell me about complaining, or be a pit welder at GM or something like that. Not to denigrate those jobs, but there's hard work out there. Coming in this building and sitting down and playing music. Really, you're going to bitch about this?
Yep.
Give me a break.
That's all right. Being from the Midwest, being from Indiana, and all my friends back there kind of went in the military right after high school, or they went and worked at a factory, which they still do today, and they work their way up. A very small amount of people even went to college. I did, and I moved to Miami immediately just because I wanted to be warm.
Yeah.
And the beautiful women of Miami, because Jennifer Lopez works at Burger King down there, every single one of them.
Yeah.
And it was very fun to be 20 years old in Miami. It also built so much character growing up in the Midwest. The seasons, I used to walk to high school and it's, negative 10 degrees out. And then I'd go work at an Olive Garden afterwards. And this generation today, too, feels very entitled in their babies. And I don't know.
It's weird. It's weird.
Very strange.
One of the things for me is kind of my personal mantra is don't become an old fart. Because I end up working with a lot of artists in their 20s still, and when you get in the music starts, you're all on the same playing field at that point. But there's that element of things where you're just sitting there going, you're kind of watching like some attitudes, or like I'll do a clinic and you're talking to young players, and really their whole goal is like they're almost sitting there with like a BMW catalog. They're figuring out where and you're going, you should be playing better. You should have music in front of you and not a car catalog, but you think you're gonna, exactly. Or one of the things that really I think is really tragic in a way is one of the joys of coming in a studio like this is when you sit behind the console, you get in that sweet spot and you listen to playbacks, and you listen with big amps, big speakers, and you look at generations now of phone and earbuds is their musical experience. It sounds adequate. I mean, you can listen to this stuff. Yeah. But when you've had the time to sit with, voice of the theater speakers, and immerse yourself in this incredible, almost physical relationship with music, and you go, God, so many people have no idea what that is. I mean, when we were kids, everybody still had stereos. You had your turntable and you had your speakers and, either a decent amp or a crap amp, but you still were listening in that kind of thing, and you'd set the speakers around the room and look for the sweet spot, and you'd just kind of sit on the couch and turn the lights down and dig it.
Yeah.
And so many people now, the music becomes like background to them. They're still talking while they've got the earbuds going, or they're distracted doing other things. It's not like music is not the goal. Yeah. Music is like wallpaper as you walk into the room. And I feel really bad because so many people don't really understand what that visceral experience of really hearing music played loud and just crank it up, shake the building and stuff. That's still, man, to me, that's heaven.
Recording is coming back. I consulted with John McBride, and I used to. This year, I flew down to Nashville for 6 months every weekend. Have you ever been in his Atmos room down there at Blackbird Studios?
Yeah.
He puts on, Sgt. Pepper's or any Beatles album because he's a complete nut, hence Blackbird Studio. Hearing that sound in there, or even being in, one of our rooms listening on these big JBL mains, it's just like...
Well, Alan Sides, you just mentioned, he had a room, his own little room over there at Ocean Way. And I was working there one day, and he said, come with me. And I forget what he played for me, though. But it was like, this room is probably $1 million worth of gear in it. But we just sat there and just closed my eyes, and I went, wow, wow. It's to your most essential core.
Yeah.
It gets you.
You'll start crying almost. Have you ever been in the studio and been brought to tears because you're so moved by a song?
Oh, God, yeah.
Many times?
I'll tell you one of the coolest things I ever heard. We were doing, I think it might have been Gorilla or In the Pocket. We did those albums at Amigo Studios
Warner
in
Brothers.
North Hollywood. Yeah, and I think in one of the other rooms, like Van Halen was working at the same time. Well, there was a little mixing room there.
Yep.
And we were there for quite a while working on, at least a week or something like that. And of course, there's a big sign on the door that says "Stay out." So to me, that's like, it's like, the red cape in front of the bull.
Yeah.
So I immediately, I just kind of cracked the door and stuck my head in. And the guy who was mixing it, I said, "Come on in." So we sat down, and it was a thing Rod Stewart had done. Now, this was for Rod only. This was for him at home. This had nothing to do with an album or anything like that. There was an old either Irish or Scottish folk song that he loved, and what they had done, instrumental piece, and it was a bagpipe piece. So what they had done was they found a great piper, and they overdubbed this guy like 100 times. So it was like this mass of bagpipes. Then they found a great drummer who had like the calfskin drum, like that they would march in the fields with, and they did like 100 passes of him. Then they went to Chicago to one of the great cathedrals there and did the pipe organ on it. And the guy was mixing this, and he said, Rod just wants this to have at home to listen to. And I sat there tearing up. This is the most unbelievable thing. And especially when like the 32-foot pipes come in and the whole room just, you just go, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now. And every once in a while, you come into those things. One of the more moving things I ever remember was in 1985, we did the Grammys with Phil Collins. And Susudio was like the big hit and all that shit. So we were doing that. And all this. Well, we did the rehearsal for the show out at the Universal Amphitheater. The next artist came up, and she was going to do her rehearsal. Well, it was Whitney. Nobody knew really. Whitney Houston. It was just like she had just kind of burst on the scene. And she did her sound check, and we were all in tears. Stood up and applauded. She was so unbelievable. All the people working in the amphitheater were all, freaking out over this. And she just was out doing a sound check. It's just...
Alan Sides did I Will Always Love You.
Yeah.
And you know how many takes it took to do that song? 1.5.
Yeah.
That's one of the greatest vocal performances ever.
Well, she was one of the greatest singers.
Yeah.
If you can do that, then there's no reason. It's like when Sinatra was doing his duets albums. They said, we'd like to overdub. And he goes, overdubs are for pussies. He would do one vocal and leave. Done. You just work with it. But if you're a singer, you sing. That's the whole thing where it got so crazy where, you do like a scratch vocal for the thing. And then when the track's right, then the singer would come in. And I know, like, I did a lot of stuff with Michael Nasser. Mm-hmm. And Michael did Whitney's stuff, and he would have her doing, he'd have her reduced to tears. He'd have her like 70 vocals, and then they would comp syllables and all that, because that's that mentality. But I'm thinking, man, if you're a singer, you go out and you sing.
Yeah.
You don't sit there comping all this stuff.
The imperfections are perfection.
Yeah, but it's like when people started gridding things out, and you go, how's it feel? Mm-hmm. Just because it picked up a little when the chorus hit.
Exactly.
That's not a bad thing, you know. But these guys are all sitting looking at grids, and that's their musical concept, and they're looking at tonality and go, it's a hair sharp. God, it feels good, you know. Or when they're listening to like something, they're listening like they'll solo, like a hi-hat or something, and they'll go, see that little thing. I go, put it in the track. Do you really hear that in the track? Are you really that anal about this where you're going to go after each little thing? And that's where the business started driving me crazy, when people were looking at this stuff. Man, I still loved when I would get called by Doug Sachs to go do stuff for Sheffield, when we would do direct-to-two track stuff. And you don't make mistakes. That's the thing, is you just get out there and it's performance, and it's first generation, so it's going to sound the best it's ever going to sound. So you go out there and you play it right.
Yeah.
And
how many times have you been in the room and got it on the first take, where it's got the first take magic?
Oh, absolutely.
Or it's like your heartbeat, you know, when you get excited about something, your heartbeat speeds up a little
Yeah.
bit. That's like a chorus in a song.
Yeah.
I found the isolated vocal, Give Me Shelter.
Mm-hmm.
They were working on that in Studio One. And the amazing background singer that does... There's a whole thing about when 20
she
Feet for
woke
Stardom.
up in the middle of the night and said, get down to the studio.
I have that mix in the background going, woo! And that's in the final mix in the track. And I think that's one of the coolest things ever, you know. Or listen to like some of the Captain Beefheart's records, the way those records swing, you know, and they're not on the grid or everything's on. They're just a band playing together.
Well, like I said too, and those first takes are when the juices are really flowing. You haven't had time to intellectualize it and think about. The thing that frustrates me at times is, and I used to do this all the time when we were in the studio. We would finish a project, or if it was going to be just a track, I would have the engineer doing it. Give me a cassette board, just give me a rough mix. And then I would hear the record when it was finished, and I go, they lost it. They lost it. That rough board mix was the song, and now they've added all this crap to it, and they've tweaked it, and they've compressed it, and they've done. I said, it was so much better, and then I've got evidence. But, you know, it is what it is. But that's the nature of this beast. Or they bring in a mixing engineer who wasn't there for the basic tracks. And you go, he doesn't know the vibe that went down, and then he's bringing his own thing to it. So it's becoming his personality rather than letting the person who recorded the stuff mix it.
I always, 90% of the time, if you recorded this, you were there in the room. And also, you know, the little cool things that happen maybe on take 5 that you want to punch in somewhere. Yeah. And even if it's not the greatest mixing engineer, I want them to do it first.
Well, when we did our... Maybe, I don't know which album. We did 3 albums as a section, but one of them, we used to have a house in the valley, not a house, a rehearsal room on Oxnard near Sepulveda out in the valley. And it was like this industrial complex. So we would go out in the evenings because everybody's shops were all shut down. We knew we weren't going to bother anybody. And we would set an old Sony tape cassette deck that had like compressor mics built into it. And we would set it in the middle of the room, and we would just play and jam and recorded everything, because a lot of times we'd go back later and listen and go, that could be a tune, you know, we would play. Well, we got in the studio to do our album, and one song just never came together in the studio. And we went, it's got to be on. And we pulled out the cassettes and found our rehearsal of it. It was so good that we went, let's just put that on the album. And we just did a little bit of tweaking on the cassette and put it on the album. And you didn't notice that it was a different sonic, really. I mean, we did some things to bring it slightly, but the performance was so good that that's what you were going to be listening to. And that's the thing where a lot of people lose that. They're looking for this perfection, and they're willing to sacrifice the beauty of like that first take where the magic all took place. And, but that's a lesson learned. You know, a lot of people
and in
don't
2023, a lot of producers and mixing engineers will be like, I like this song, but we really need to modernize it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? That's the last thing we need to
Well,
do.
it's like hiring guys like us, and they always say, "Can you dumb it down?" They want to sound like you've just. I just went to a pawn shop and bought a bass.
Yeah, but MI's right there. You can get someone for $100 and they'll come over here
know.
and play that dumbed down version for you. No, yeah, that's incredible.
tough one.
And these kids today, their ears are trained to hear vocals a certain way. Drums. There's no cymbals on anything anymore.
Yeah.
One of the coolest things I've seen recently, and I love YouTube. I don't even watch cable anymore.
Yeah.
There's something on YouTube for every single person, interest, and it's better than anything you'll find on a cable TV. I love watching documentaries. There's a lot of great series. Netflix, I consulted on this Prince series that they've been working on. The same people that did The Last Dance on Michael Jordan. This thing's coming out, and it's going to be incredible. They've worked on it for 6 years. But I love your YouTube channel, which is incredible. I love Scary Pockets. Jack Conte, Ryan,
I've
friends of
done a few
mine.
of their shows.
I love seeing you on there. That's so special.
The whole idea of how they do it is what's really fun. That it's just this completely spontaneous moment.
It's all about the music and having an idea, the song, and let's recreate this on the spot together. And there's, that's exactly what we're talking about.
And make it different, make it theirs. I mean, all the songs I've done with them, I've never heard the originals on it, so I wasn't thinking how it was.
They tell you not to.
Yeah, and I was just responding to what we were doing at the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's a brilliant format. It's really a lot of fun to do.
There's such good people. They do a lot of those in this room, and I got my girl Carmen on one, and they were really cool. Gave her a solo.
Great.
She played with Jeff Beck, and they're just great people. You know how that started, too? It's like, Jack started Patreon, but they didn't put a bunch of money in that. They were shooting the first ones on an iPhone sideways in a garage. Yeah. And just kept building. Now they have a tour that sells out all over the world. And,
I know, it's crazy, isn't it?
It's such a fan base. And it's like, that's the kind of creativity. It's just like, get going on something, just the momentum. This will lead to this, and just do it.
Well, you also make it something that's legitimate. Like that. You're not like trying to get people to buy something that sucks.
Exactly.
So you're hustling them. I mean, all you do is put something really cool out, and then people will gravitate towards it, and then word goes out.
Yep.
And next thing I mean, for me, like when I started my YouTube channel, it was really all because of COVID.
Yeah.
Because like everybody else, I looked at my date book, and in an instant, it blew away like a fart in a hurricane. It was done. And you're just going, well, rather than being defeatist about it, you go, well, what am I going to do? But we had just finished Phil Collins' Not Dead Yet tour at that point. And I had people writing to me, bass players going, man, we saw you in Germany or South America. And there was a lot of stadium gigs. So, I mean, it was really big, huge thing. And they were going, it sounded amazing, but we couldn't hear some of the details of it. And so I ended up contacting Michelle Collan, who was our front of house mixer, and said, could you send me a couple of shows, just your board mix? And I got those, and I loaded it into my laptop, and I had a little Bose speaker and an amp next to me, and I put up the first song of the show and just set up my iPhone and played along with it. But I experimented a little bit to where the bass was louder than the track, so you could hear every note.
Sick.
And the first day I put that up on YouTube, and then the next day I did the second song. Well, on the third day I had people start writing going, man, we love your YouTube channel. I'm going, what are you talking about? Because I didn't think it was I wasn't thinking I'm starting a YouTube channel. I just thought I'm just showing some examples of these bass parts. Well, I ended up doing the whole show, a song a day. And when that ended, I was having a great time. And all of a sudden, I went, well, what am I going to do now? So I started doing James Taylor and Jackson Browne and all these things and just showing bass parts, all these songs. And I really made no effort on this thing. And I don't know, there's 240,000 people on the channel now.
Wow, you got 250,000 subscribers. Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah, I made no effort at all to it, but I still put something up almost daily. I just did another Linda Ronstadt Sail Away song, Randy Newman song. I just showed the bass part today on that.
Wow.
But I try to do something almost every day on the channel.
That's amazing. And also people from different countries, and you show studios like United and Sunset, and they're not going to be able to have a chance to come in here. Or even this show. It's like these stories, where would you ever hear this kind of stuff?
That's the beauty of what you're doing.
Yeah.
This is essential documentation for the future, because especially with all the cats that are getting older and they're disappearing. Like, I mean, it's like I open up Facebook and it's more of an obituary page at this point.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and then I love having that, and that's why I'm trying to interview as many people as I can out there on the road and talking to the Kenny Aronoffs and the Amy, I mean, all these people. And like with Lyle Lovett, we were out these past couple of years, and we're going out again starting in January. I do a tour of every venue we play and talk to the people in the halls and show all the basements and attics and all. Because these people, even if they can come to a gig, they're only going to see the lobby and their seat. They're not going to see backstage. And
that's what everybody wants. A fan wants access. They want to hear the music, but they want this. Even like Gibson, who I talked to, and they have a massive following. They put out like live songs that they do and stuff, and it does okay, but it's like the interview series that they do behind the songs, those have millions of hits.
Well, a lot of people don't like doing that too. I mean, there's a lot of guys I've been on the road with where you're just trying to get them to do it, and they don't want to do it. They just feel it's an invasion, and you go, okay, fine.
Yeah.
I love it. I love, like with our documentary film, I've been to tons of the film festivals doing Q&As afterwards, and I love just talking to the audience, and they have a million questions about all this stuff that they just seen on the screen, and you just go, great.
Yeah, and it makes their day. It enhances their lives and their experience. I do need to pepper in a few bass questions from some people here. So, like Sean Hurley, you know him. He's
great.
In my opinion, one of the greatest session players, not only because of his talent, but because of his vibe in the room. He can get along with an artist so much. He's so versatile. But
oh, that's Sean calling right now. It's actually Waddy Wachtell. I'm going to tell him we're busy.
Tell him to come in on Sunset Sound Roundtable.
I'm at Sunset Sound doing an interview. And they said they would love to have you on it, do an interview too.
Yeah, I do that.
He asked me about a barbecue place in Sacramento. He's out with Stevie Nicks, and they're doing this show tonight with Billy Joel and Stevie Nicks, a stadium gig that they're doing. So
Stevie Nicks is touring right now.
Yeah, she's been touring for the whole year. I mean, they're out all the time.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Sean Hurley, though.
Yeah. Sean and I shared duties on Laurie Basilio's.
Oh, yeah, she's an incredible guitarist.
Yeah, she's an amazing musician. Yeah, Sean and I were the two bass players on it.
Yeah, she's super cool. Sean wanted me to ask you, I spoke to him this morning. Sean also wanted me to ask you, when did you first meet Russ Kunkel?
I met Russ Kunkel in 1968, I believe, and he was in a band called Things to Come. They were a local Southern California band, and I think I was playing with a band called Little John Farm at the time, and I think we were on a same bill somewhere, and I watched their set, and I think I just probably said hello to him after that.
Yeah.
But the first time we really connected was with James, when I was brought in to do the Troubadour gig with them.
Obviously, the rhythm section with him has got to be one of your favorites. Who's another? I play guitar, but I started as a drummer. My father was a drummer. Who's a drummer that, Jeff Porcaro, I'm sure, but when you come in a session or you're going on a tour and you see Vinnie Colaiuta's name, who is somebody that really is
God, man. I think that one of the greatest blessings I've had in this business is the drummers.
Yeah.
Everybody from Vinnie or JR or Keltner or Victor Indrizzo, Ray Brinker, Mike Baird. Back in the day for me, I spent so much time with Carlos Vega. I mean, just like there's a wealth of amazing drummers, and every time I walk in a studio and I see one of these cats, I just go, oh yeah. I used to work a lot with Ed Green, who did like all of the Motown stuff, and then he moved on to Nashville. Later I find out, because I started as a classical pianist, and I finally found out many years later talking to Ed that his mom was one of my piano teachers.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, stuff. But no, it's all these drummers. God, yeah, it's like, I love when I get to work with Keltner, just because Keltner is probably the least orthodox of most of these guys. He'll just do some of the most amazing things, and you just go, wow. Rick Marotta, Rick Schlosser. There's been like so many of these guys.
What about when you get on a session and the drummer sucks and you're...
It's rarely happened, but every once in a while it does, and you just grin and bear it. You get through the date, and you sort of feel bad about it. The real problem with it a lot of times is those are the guys with the attitude.
Yeah.
'Cause I think deep down they know they suck, so they're going to put up this barricade in front of you of personality. I've been really fortunate that very few times in my whole career have I been in a studio situation where there was a guy who really sucked.
Yeah.
You know, they usually tend to find the right guys. Now, I did one project where the artist had a friend who was a guitar player, and he really wanted his friend on the date. And this was with a producer who had like some really massive hits and stuff, but the artist was really saying, no, I really want my friend on this thing.
Yeah.
And the guy really was not good, and it was really fucking up the date, having this guy there. And the rest of the band was amazing. So the producer kind of got everybody to the side, and he said, look, I'm just going to say we're having a technical problem, and we're going to have to call the date and all this, and then come back in an hour kind of a thing. Well, so we all said, okay, it's fine. So we come back in an hour. About 2 hours later, the guy comes back to pick his gear up, and he sees the date going on, and he's not there. It was one of the most uncomfortable, horrible moments on that. But the producer just, I didn't have the heart to tell the guy he was not good enough to be on the session.
Yeah.
And so it was one of those things where everybody's like, kind of try and get as small as they can in the room. It's like, it's like back in school, like when they were doing pop quiz. If you did this, you didn't think the teacher could see you, and when they wouldn't call on you.
One of my favorite artists, and an artist who's done a lot of amazing albums here, Jackson Browne.
Yeah.
Describe what Jackson Browne means to you and to the world of music.
Jackson's just one of the best cats in the world. His humanity, number one. I mean, he's one of those people that if there's anybody in need or if there's some kind of a fundraiser, he's the guy at the front of the line saying, how can I help? And that, to me, is reflected in his songwriting and his performance. He really lives every moment of his life. The first time, when we did his first album, we did that actually at Crystal Studio, where John Fishbeck, who I met James Taylor through, I mean, all these things weave around. We did it there. And I mentioned it in our documentary. When I got called to work with Jackson Browne, I kind of thought he would be a black artist, because it was that kind of like a Jackson Browne is like a Superfly kind of a name. And all of a sudden there's this little white guy in the room. I go, oh, wow, you're Jackson, cool. But here we are, like cutting Doctor My Eyes, and stuff. And I just like, as soon as he started writing Jamaica Say You Will, I mean, his songs are so good. He's such a brilliant writer. I've treasured every chance I've ever had to work with Jackson. He's great people. He's real supportive of the community and the musicians around him. Those days, there was something about the music scene in that early 70s in this town where there's a lot of times now where people are real possessive, like they got a record, I don't want to get away from me kind of thing. There, everybody's hanging out with everybody. So you'd go to somebody's house, you'd go to Carole King's house, Jackson would be there, and David Crosby would be there. You go to Mama Cass's house, and Mama Cass was Russ's sister-in-law, Russ Kunkel's sister-in-law, and there'd be all these people. Joni Mitchell would be there, and Stephen Still. There was a community here where everybody was sharing. We'd be in the studio with like James Taylor, and David Crosby and Graham Nash would just show up at the session, and they'd go, let's do background vocals now, and have them sing. I mean, it wasn't like all this kind of plot, my people will call your people kind of stuff. And that was amazing. And Jackson was like right in the thick of all that, and still is. He's really a gifted artist. The only thing I'm really grateful at this point is they finally showed his age. He's got a gray beard, and his hair's got gray and thinning out a bit, because he was like this young kid. While everybody else was aging, he was like Benjamin Button or something, going in the other direction.
Yeah, he's got some really bad back issues right now. I heard, speaking of being brought to tears by music and songwriters, I heard him do an acoustic version of These Days about a year ago. And he was having a lot of pain in his back, and he still did it.
Yeah.
It was for this Bob Saget thing down the street.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just an incredible experience, but just the passion he has, and hearing someone like that sing that song acoustic, and
he's great. When we did Running on Empty, that tour, It was unbelievable because here we were going to go on the road playing all new songs for an audience that had never heard any of this before. And it was like guerrilla touring at that point. I mean, we just went for it, and we recorded every night. We had the great Greg Ladani engineering it, and it was amazing. And it was it's probably one of the best live albums ever because it's really how it went down. There's so many live albums I've heard that actually they finish and then they went, and the only thing left live is the audience. And they've gone in and tweaked everything and punched in all the horns and all. Running on Empties as it went down. I mean, it's really an amazing piece of work to me.
I want to put that on. What do you remember about being in studio with Studio One with Jackson, the production team, the songs? Do you remember anything specific about being on The Pretender?
It was all great. You know, I mean, that's the thing. It's like Jackson's tunes made you want to play, number one. And then the community that we had with, the Russ Kunkles and me and all the cats. When we'd get in there, it was like this kind of like a family picnic getting together. They'd start a song and everybody find their way. We'd all weave around for a moment trying to figure out what was going on. Because there was no rehearsals for these. It's not like they're going, we're going to work for a week and then we'll go in the studio. I mean, it all went down as it went down. And it was always a joyous experience to be in the studio together. And
that would have been a detriment to have a band like that do pre-production because you would have wasted so much.
You would have lost the great takes.
Yeah.
And that's what I always tell people when they say, well, we'd like to rehearse beforehand. I go, then rehearse in the studio and run the machine because what happens is when you rehearse a lot of times, you'll go to like some rehearsal hall. Everybody sets up together and they're all working on the stuff. You get used to that sound, and all of a sudden you're in a studio and you're in headphones, and and it doesn't have that vibe. When you're, I hate baffles. I think a lot of that stuff is really there because they don't trust that people aren't going to make mistakes. So they want to have everything isolated so they can go in and tweak it. But you listen to some of the greatest records ever made, and there was almost no baffling in the room. There was stuff, and if you could ISO tracks, you'd be hearing leakage from all over. But that leakage also creates the vibe of that sound.
Sure.
And so with that, I always say, whatever you can do, record it if you're going to do it, because there's going to be something that's going to happen that ain't going to happen when we get in the studio to do it.
Yep.
And I love that part of it.
This show started because Eddie Van Halen passed, and I was like, I want to interview Ted Templeman and Don Landy, which I've spoke to Don Landy and Ted Templeman, and they've both confirmed that they would do this, and I'm just sitting here waiting.
Yeah.
I really want them to come in. Not to put you on the spot, Ted and Don, but Don called me out of the blue and just said, Drew, I love the show. I'll do it, but I want Ted to do it with me. I said, yes, amazing. Tell me when. But it started with just about Van Halen. I wanted to investigate Van Halen because Eddie had passed, and they came in here and did their original demos.
Yeah.
So do you remember seeing Eddie here at all back in the day?
No, I don't think. I mean, the closest I ever got to those guys, I think, was at Amigo when we were doing like the Gorilla or In the Pocket, one of those things, and they were in another room working. But usually everybody was kind of like so busy, but you might pass somebody in the hallway and just say hi. I think I bumped into Eddie, Studio D at Henson. I think he was doing something there, and Wolfie was playing on it. So I went over to say hi to his kid and stuff. And Eddie was, because Eddie's in my book, in my finger book. I got him that day over at A&M.
Wow. Wolfgang did a record in here, and Ed came down. And Bill Mims, our engineer, had talked to him, and those guys did 5 records here.
It's still shocking that he's gone. I mean, so many of these cats, you just go, really?
Yep.
Jeff Beck is gone.
That was.
I mean, how the hell did that happen?
That girl that I working on producing a record, she at 23 wrote a record with Jeff Beck, Loud Hailer. Did you ever get a chance to work with Jeff or jam with him at all?
The funny part with Jeff is one of my favorite albums I ever worked on was Billy Cobham's Spectrum.
Yeah. Amazing.
And that album changed the way Jeff Beck played guitar, because when he heard Tommy Bolin on that, he completely rethought his whole approach to guitar. And every time I'd bump into Jeff, he'd go, Stratus, Stratus, and he'd come up. And then he's in my book, and that's when I caught him right after.
You got Beck, too.
Beck's in, I think I got.
Let's talk about that book for a minute. We got it on our coffee table out there in the main office. This thing is incredible. It's the greatest coffee table book ever.
Here we go.
There is...
It's about 6,000 pictures of people giving me the finger. In this,
You have everyone. Bootsy
There's
Collins.
Bette Midler just went by here. There's so many.
When I saw you like 6 months ago, we were flipping through it together. I go, did anybody turn you down? He goes, I'm sure a few people did, but you said one person did. And I go, who was that? And you go, Tall Wilkenfeld.
Yeah.
And I go, you fucking kidding me? I go, she's a bass player. And I go, yeah. But then she saw everybody that was in the book when it came out and asked me to be back in it.
And I said no.
You said, fuck you.
Oh, I'm almost there.
Where did the concept come up with this?
Okay, here we go. There's Jeff Beck, and then there's Charlie Watts. Both of who are immortalized in my book. This also, and it's actually explained right at the front of the book. Here, there's a little picture right here of Steve Winstead, Chinner, who was my bass tech on Phil Collins's tour. And what happened was on Phil's first final farewell tour, there was talk that Phil was going to retire at the end of the tour. And I thought, I may never see a lot of these people again because the crew, there's Paul Williams and
Bonnie Raitt.
There was talk that Phil would retire, and I may never see these people again because they're from all over the world. The crew is from everywhere. So I thought, I'm just going to take pictures of everybody and just tuck it away in like a little memory book. And as luck would have it, the very first person I go to is Chinner, my bass tech, and he's working on his laptop. I say, Chinner, give me a smile, and he just goes like that.
Oh, wow.
And I look at it and I went, oh, that's cool. So I went and got everybody, Phil, his manager, truck drivers, bus drivers, you name it. There's Gwyneth Paltrow over there. I did a video with her and
she's amazing.
Grabbed her then. And I put it away. It was, no big deal. There's David Lindley, George Massenburg, I think.
Massenburg.
And then when I went out with Toto a couple of years later, I thought, I'm going to grab the same thing with those guys. Well, it took on a life of its own. And actually, with the 6,000 pictures I've got in here, I still have 7,000 pictures I haven't used. There's Lyle right after his colonoscopy, Lyle Lovett, and Billy Bob Thornton. Billy's a dear friend.
Yeah. Hey, that's Sunset. That's Nico Bolas.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's certainly been fun.
Chris Bodie.
I ended up meeting
Alan Sides.
Yeah, I ended up meeting a guy who's become a very dear friend of mine named Richard. His nickname's Blue Tremarchi,
Eddie Vedder.
And he has a company. He does like fine artwork and stuff. And we met at a party, and I told him about these pictures, and he said, "Do a book. Let's do a book." And we ended up together putting this whole thing, going through like reams and reams of. That's John Fishback
that's
there.
That's David Z, Prince engineer.
That's in this room.
Right there.
Right here. This was doing Judith Owens' album here.
Oh, wow.
There's John Fishback, who is the guy who introduced me to James Taylor.
Yeah.
And Alan.
Who's that? I know him.
Yeah. So I've ended up like with this little business on the side doing these books. And I ship. I'm the sole provider. Everybody just orders it. If they go to LelandSklarsBeard.com.
Oh, you go to what's the website?
It's Leland Sklars SKLARS Beard.com. And then I've also got. I brought this down. I'm doing these T-shirts with my beard on them.
That's amazing.
And so I've got these, and I show up at gigs now, and people are all wearing these shirts out there. They've bought. There's Greg Bissonette, there's Bob Glob, there's Jim Cox.
Flea?
Yep, Flea.
Yeah, we were going through this yesterday.
Yeah, it's pretty nuts.
Incredible. Very cool.
It's really fun. I mean, to me, it was like, I've had a few people kind of go, that's really, I don't know if that's in good taste. And I go, it's just a gesture. Everybody that I asked, for the most part, just jumped on. There's Robert Hayes, Tim Pierce, down here, Mike Baird, Jimmy Buffett.
Oh, wow. That's cool, too, because it's just something different.
And, well, the thing, too, is people say, I didn't name everybody in here because, to me, this is about humanity. So I wasn't about to say, well, here's the celebrities, and here's this, like, there will be a person I met on an airplane, and their picture's bigger than Jay Leno's, because it's just I like, there's a mishmash of stuff in here. There's Jonas Hellberg, a great bass player.
Oh, and you want to just
There's my parents.
Oh, I love
this.
that.
Was doing the Grammys. This is we got Willie Nelson, Chris Christopherson, Merle Haggard.
Yes.
So it was with the three of them, and I have them individually, but I thought I had the three of them together. So I thought, what the hell? Let's go for it here.
I know his son Ben.
Yeah, but there's all kinds of.
Have you done a lot of work with Willie Nelson?
Oh yeah, I love Willie.
Yeah.
John Goodman.
He gives you 2 takes.
Oh
Willie.
yeah. Oh yeah. No, Willie. Yeah, he's not going to flog
Charlie
that stuff.
Watts.
He wants to get out of there.
Did you get McCartney or Ringo?
Ringo would never do it. Ringo is all about this.
Yeah.
I mean that, and the times I've met McCartney, you also have to read the room.
Yeah.
And you grab what feels right. There's my wife. It's like.
There was a producer that I admire and a period of record making that Atlantic Records did that is just mind-blowing.
Mm-hmm.
Ray Charles, to me, and the way they made those records, the sound of them is just so incredible.
Yeah.
Ahmet Art, again, you worked with him.
Oh, I worked with Ahmet. I loved Ahmet.
Tell me a story, a session, a vibe, how he was in the rooms, what his theory about music was.
Well, Ahmet, that was the heyday to me. Like when people talk about producers, the Joe Smiths and the Ahmet Ertegans and those people, these guys, so many of the labels kind of grew into lawyers and accountants running the labels. It was very corporate. Guys like Ahmet, they knew they could make money with this, but their passion was the music. We did an album with a guy named Steve Kowalczyk, which was kind of like a Harry Connick type artist before Harry Connick. He was doing like the sort of Sinatra-y thing, but not Sinatra songs. He was an original writer, but he did the stuff. And I remember Ahmet, they had me come down to do this. It was a great band, Nino Tempo playing sax, and I think Carlos might have been the drummer on the stuff. They wanted upright on it, and I started on upright, but my chops weren't up to this. But I said, look, I've got a Washburn AB45 acoustic bass that I've made into a fretless, and let me play it for you if you like it. And Ahmet, it's great. He heard it and he loved it, and so that's what I used on the album. And Ahmet was just great. He would just sit there and listen, and he's one of those guys that didn't say a lot, but when he talked, you listened, because he was laser right there. But he really gave the band the space to really find the songs and do it. And I always remember I would look just down. He had like these velveteen loafers on with AE embroidered on them. And he was a stylish cat.
Yeah.
And but there was a number of producers like that, the old school guys, where they pretty much they orchestrated the band. They put the band together, and then they would sit back and let the band find the music, and then they would throw out their ideas once they heard it, rather than being one of those guys that's immediately jumping into the fray.
Yep.
Ahmet was, and I was around Ahmet a lot because Phil Collins was on Atlantic, so Ahmet would be at any of the functions we were doing, and he was just one of those cats with panache and style. You just go, this dude is.
And new songwriting.
Well, that's it. Richard Perry. Was very much like Richard was not so much a hand, and Richard's who I worked with when I worked with Ray Charles. It was with Richard.
Was Steve Lindsay on that too? Then he's kind of his co-producer, underboss. From 85 to 90.
On the stuff I did with him, it was I did a song for you, the Leon Russell song with him, and he ended up winning a Grammy with it, and it was me and Steve Gadd were doing that. And then I worked with Ray a number of times at his studio, which was down on Crenshaw in East LA. And we had one of the fun projects I did there was a guy named Ellis Hall. I don't know if you ever heard of Ellis, but Ellis is a black blind singer, songwriter. Well, Ray and Ellis and Stevie Wonder were going to form a group called Three Blind Mice, and then Ray died. And it never came through, but they had done all the prep work for it and stuff. It would have been so great. But I remember Ray asking me into his office one day, and I go and I sit down, and he shuts the lights off. It's pitch black in there. And he goes, I know where you are. I mean, it's like, that blind sense. I mean, he knew the room. He knew where every speck of dust was, and you're sitting in there going, "Where the fuck am I?"
Yeah.
He was a funny cat, and he'd never learn your name. He just go, bass player. He'd call you.
God, the stories I've heard about Ray Charles, he'd be called in to do a tracking session, and it was $50,000. And if you didn't have cash there for him, he'd send his manager in and say, "Oh, Mr. Charles will not be joining you today, but feel free to call us when you do have his money."
Yeah.
And then an hour later, they'd get the cash, 50 grand. And
there was a bunch of cats like that, that just...
Steve or Little Richard.
Yeah, all those guys. I mean, because they got burned so many times in their history that you just go... I'm not unpacking until I've got cash in my pocket, and that's it.
But those kind of people, those were the filters. It wasn't the disc jockeys. It was great A&Rs, and those guys really knew their shit.
Yeah.
And the producers, Richard Perry, Ahmet, they knew songs.
Yeah. Peter Asher's that way.
Oh, there's so
Peter
many.
really knows music, but Peter also really knows a song. So
Yeah,
he can
those guys really knew their stuff. And is that what's, obviously the internet and 100,000 uploads to Spotify every day, but wouldn't you agree that those people had so much experience and so much talent that they shaped an artist to do a thing, Well,
a lot of artists came in to them with an innate talent, but they weren't a package. They hadn't found themselves yet, and these guys could really help them without changing them dramatically. They would just allow them to really evolve into what they had to be. Yeah. And the thing what I loved with so many of those guys is they would support artists through many years of albums that weren't successful.
Yep.
How many years did Bonnie Raitt record before she had Nick of Time? Yep. And because they all know that if they can find that one thing that's going to make it, then the back catalog's going to sell.
Exactly.
So this is an investment. It's not like they're going to give you one single, and if it tanks, you're out of here.
We did Sweet Forgiveness for my Women of Sunset record, recreated it, and turned it into this kind of Jack White fuzzed out thing. But she did that album here and a lot of other stuff. But she was across the street at Crosby's studio at Crossroads, and they came over here. And that Nick of Time was 89.
Yeah.
Don Was, right?
Yeah.
And that was a massive hit. Or
you never know.
Jackson Browne.
Yeah.
I mean, how long did Geffen kind of work with him?
Yeah.
Geffen kind of discovered him, correct?
Well, he was certainly involved with him. I remember there were times where David would come to the studio when we were over at Crystal. We'd have the door locked, and we would it's David's. I was like, shh, don't say a word. We'd wait for him to leave because we were in a moment. You're just going, we don't want anybody else in here. Just go away.
What was that? Obviously David's extremely successful as an agent to an A&R label head, everything. But a lot of artists would put they'd hide from him or put signs. If David Geffen comes here, do not let him in. What was he like?
Just because he was an intense personality. All that success comes with that kind of a drive and stuff. And there's a lot of times where you just don't want anybody else in the room. You've got your little group of guys that are in this thing. We don't need other information at that point. And he might have had great information. Paul Allen from Microsoft was a dear friend of mine, and he had a fantastic studio in Coldwater Canyon. And he would hang out, we would do some sessions up at his studio, and he was a really good guitar player. And he would be hanging out, and he would just sit there, and then every once in a while he'd go, what about in the bridge if you went and did this? And we would go, no shit. He's quiet. He was just there hanging. He liked hanging, but his ears were always working. And so some of these guys are really good, like Ahmet's, guys like that. They really knew how to just sit back and let it happen.
Yeah.
But if they had an idea, they put it out. And the relationships were strong enough where, the artists or the band could go, no, I don't think so. And they go, okay, go, just want you to think about another alternative. And there's a lot of, not a lot, but there's those guys, they really shaped the industry that we're in. They really, the labels, back in the day of labels, when you had the Lou Adlers and the David Anderleys and all these guys sitting over there on
Ted
the
Templeman,
A&M
Russ Titleman.
No, Jerry Moss, who was the other half of A&M, he was business. He didn't come in on the sessions and sit there and tell you what to do or anything like that. But Herb would come in and he would throw out ideas and stuff, and he was so good that you'd go, oh, great, thank you. I mean, you'd open the door, there was a lot of times in those old days, when there would be, the union would send out like a union rep to make sure legit dates for him, and we'd all shh. The guy's seeing a parking lot full of cars, but nobody's answering the door. He's being quiet. There's a funny dynamic to the whole business at that point. But
Next bass question from a bassist from USC School of Music. Please ask Mr. Lee Sklar, what is his favorite approach to muting?
I have a kind of a weird way of muting. Well, a lot of guys do this palm thing when they're playing, and they do that. If I think something really needs to be muted, I tend to just put a couple of little pieces of sponge under my strings or between my strings and do that. But with my left hand, even though I don't think about it that much, when I'm playing, I have a thing that I do where I play a note and I lift. I kind of do the muting with my left hand as I'm playing, rather than a right hand where a lot of guys will use the side of their hand or something like that. When I'm playing, it's hard for me to describe it because it's something I do. I've done it since I started playing. But as I'm playing, I'm always lifting off if I feel that I want that note to end. Not so much muting it tonally, but muting it for length of time. It's either touching the strings with my right hand or lifting my fingers with my left hand. But I'm not one of these guys that has a lot of techniques for like palm muting and things like that. But one of the things I like to carry with me is a whole bunch of little blocks of sponge or foam. And like if I want my old bass to sound like a P bass with flat wounds on it, I just take a piece of foam and I put it between the G and the D string down at the bridge, and then I put another piece between the A and the E string, and all of a sudden my lively, active bass sounds like an old flat wound P bass on it. So I carry that around, and I carry different densities because those will create different sonics with it.
What's your prized possession bass guitar that you have?
Well, I have two basses that really are the ones that mean the most to me. It's not, and they're probably the best basses I've had. The very first bass real bass I had, because I had like an old Japanese bass when I first started learning. I think it was a St. George. Then I had an Echo bass after that because I wanted to be like McCartney, but I couldn't afford a Hofner. So Echo was like that kind of a shape and stuff. It was a much cheesier bass. But I had an opportunity God, it kills me now, for $90 to get a mint 62 jazz bass.
Oh my God.
Back, it must have been around 1966, but it was a 62 bass, candy apple red. And I was still in college at that point, and one night I got bored and I took out a knife and a saw and I cut the bass body all up and changed the shape, and I carved the whole thing out. It says peace and love and all this shit on it. That was the bass I used on all of James's early stuff. I used that on Dr. My Eyes. I used it on Stratus with Billy Cobham and all that.
Sick.
But eventually I ended up, and I still can't remember how I ended up with it, I ended up with a 62 precision neck, not a bass, but just a neck. And one of the watering holes in LA at that point was Westwood Music, Fred Wallace's Westwood Music down on Westwood Boulevard, south of Wilshire. And it was one of those places you go in any time, you'd see J.D. Souther, Jackson, all the cats in town. That was the place we hung out. It was so inviting, and it was just a great scene. Well, the guy who did all of the repair work and who still does repair work and builds instruments is John Carruthers. I was having John do some work on something, and I brought this neck in. And what we ended up doing was, he said there's a company called Charvel out near raging San Dimas area, and they were doing aftermarket things. So I went out there, and they had a stack about this high of blank alder P-bass bodies that they had just run a thing. So I got a piece of wire, and I hung each one from a piece of wire and just tapped them, and one of those resonated. So I bought that thing, went back to John with it. We contacted... I'm blanking right now. He started EMG pickups. We contacted them, and they sent me 2 sets. They had done a run of P-bass pickups. But I was a jazz bass guy, so what I had done was we routed this blank body out and put the P-bass pickups where jazz pickups would have gone, But instead of a positioning like this, we reversed that positioning because I thought, because P basses are two pieces, whereas jazz bass is a single. I thought, why did Leo Fender put the half that's on the G and the D string closer to the bridge? Because sonically they're going to sound better than the A and the E string. So we reversed it and put that side.
Wow.
Put those there. Still had a cavity in the middle between those that where the pickups would have gone on a P bass body. And that's where we run 18 volts on these EMGs. So there's two batteries under that. I don't like a P neck. And so I brought in my old Peace Love bass, the carved bass, and John made a template off of that neck. And we reshaped this precision neck into being a 62 jazz bass neck. Well, in doing that, we had to take out the frets to do it. So while he was doing that, I was looking around the shop there, and I saw this wire hanging on the wall. I said, "What's this?" He goes, "Oh, it's mandolin wire, fret wire." I said, "Let's try that." He goes, "Oh, it'll never work." And I said, "Do it, and then if it sucks, I'll pay you for a refret to a regular bass frets." We put it in, and it was magic. Every one of my basses has mandolin frets on them. And it's almost like it's fretless, but you have all the accuracy. And all the cats that have ever played my basses goes, "Holy shit, this is amazing." And the thing is, you would have thought they would wear out. Well, I call that bass Frankenstein because it's all these body parts that we put together. It was never a real bass. So the thing that we did was we did it. And in all these years, I've used that on more than any other instrument I've used on records. And I'm on my third refret since 1973.
Wow.
On it. So they held up well. And I play really hard. But the essence of that one, more than anything, is in 1981, the Dodgers won the World Series. And we got called to go in the studio with the Big Blue Wrecking Crew to cut Queen's "We Are the Champions" with those guys. And they were all like fucking hammered. It was like the day after they had won the World Series and stuff. And we're in there with Jeff Porcaro and Mike Finnegan and just Chris Bond, who did the Hall & Oates records I did with like Rich Girl and all that. He put it together, and he was playing guitar on it.
You're on Rich Girl?
Yeah.
That's your bass
I
on
did
Rich
all
Girl?
the early Hall & Oates.
Holy
Did
shit.
the first album, and then I did Band and Luncheonette, and I think Beauty on the Back Street. I did those albums with Hall & Oates. So we're in the studio, and it was still a blank body. And at the end of the session, the guys are signing baseballs and shit for all of us. I said, "Sign my bass." So they all signed my bass and everything. Well, I end up, shortly after that, I'm at a gig with James Taylor. We're playing, and we're backstage, and Rocky Bleier and Lynn Swan from the Pittsburgh Steelers are there, and they see the bass, and they go, "Baseball players are pussies. You need football players." So they signed it. Then it took off, and there's hundreds of signatures on this bass. Everybody from Merle Haggard to Andy Griffith, because I did a couple albums with Andy Griffith.
Yeah.
I've got Jeff Porcaro's on it. Entwistle was on. One of the funniest things was I did an album project, and on one of the tracks they wanted me and John Entwistle to both play on it together.
Same track.
Same track.
Holy
at
shit.
the same time. We
Wow.
worked out part. But the funny thing was he played beforehand. We were goofing around, and he wanted to try my bass, and I wanted to try his, and neither of us could play the other's bass because I have really high action. His action is almost on the neck because he hammers really hard and all this shit. And we're looking at each other and going, "This is so weird." Neither of us could play the other's instrument.
Wow.
I couldn't get a clean tone, and his fingers were killing him trying to play with my action stuff. It was a funny moment. We just look at each other and this is pretty weird. He was such a good cat and one of my favorite bass players. So, it's funny, but that bass, because of the signatures, has more, even with its pedigree, as all the records that I've played Frankenstein on, it's seeing all the signatures on there. B.B. King's on it.
Wow.
Because even though I did B.B. King's 80th birthday, and I used my Hofner, I wanted to just have that kind of a sound, so I deadened the Hofner all up and put a bunch of foam in it so it sounded like an old upright. And I was sitting this close to B.B. King for a week going, "Holy shit." And we were doing duets, so Bobby Blue Bland was there, and Billy
Friends with his
Gibbons came
son,
in and
Rod Bland. He's a drummer. Bobby's son. I love Bobby Bland. I love the blues music. I grew up on it. I saw Buddy Guy play when I was 4 years old, and to me, him, Jeff Beck, they're the two best.
That's the shit.
Yeah, I mean, those guys are just.
Well, I got to meet in the kind of going into the late 60s, I got to meet harmonica George Smith, who was one of the great harp players. I did a lot of gigs with George, and he turned me on. I got to work with Big Mama Thornton and Jimmy Reed. All these cats. Albert Collins, I got to play Frosty and Snow Cone with Albert Collins, like the two of the greatest shuffles ever. All these cats. I was working in Watts the night the Watts riots broke out with George Smith.
Holy shit.
It was that period of my life is still one of the richest for me because I got to be around all those cats, being around Pee Wee Creighton, and there was a guy named Cadillac Shaky Jake who dressed kind of like in this seersucker suit, played harmonica, but his shtick was he had a chimp dressed just like him that also played harmonica.
Yeah.
So they would both be on stage with this monkey and this cat together. It was like unbelievable. I love that period so much.
I love blues music in general. One, it's shaped so much of rock and roll, and just even today, like an artist like Jack White, who's revolutionized the blues to a whole new generation. But let's say Clapton, he does the Crossroads Festival.
Yeah.
I know Gary Clark Jr. And I knew Gary before he was even on a label. He was following Jimmy Vaughn around in a little Pearl Cadillac. Gary got put on by Doyle Bramhall through Clapton at the Crossroads Festival, and he did a song called Bright Lights, which is also a Jimmy Reed song, Bright Lights. And he's very influenced by Jimmy Reed and obviously the blues. But when Gary did 2-3 songs there at Chicago 12 years ago, that exposure, that one moment, Warner Brothers signed him. It was Lenny Waronker's last kind of artist. He was really mentoring, and Scooter Weintraub, his manager, who reps Sheryl Crow. I love Gary, and I think he's such an incredible artist and keeps real musicianship alive. And
one of the hardest things about contemporary exposure is, back in the day, when you'd be listening to radio, they would talk about who the artist was.
Yep.
Yeah, and now you listen to these long playlists and you have no idea who the hell you're listening to. I'm going, that's great, but who the hell? And I don't have the time to grab my phone and pull it up and Shazam it or whatever, trying to see who the hell this is. But every once in a while, it's like I love like all the controversy over like Greta Van Fleet. They're just Zeppelin. But they got their own thing, but it's obvious they're honoring that. It's like when you hear some of these bands that are still trying to, they're emulating AC/DC, and because who are still one of my favorite bands ever.
Well, look at like The Weeknd, who is one of the biggest artists in the world. Go listen to some '80s music from Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis.
Yeah,
tell me he didn't get that Lindrum synth sound. And
so much has been drawn from that well, and you get generations now that don't even realize what the original stuff was. They've moved in at that point. But I don't follow music that much. I drive around and I listen. I listen to a lot of Sirius XM, a lot of different channels on that, and hear stuff. But my focus for the most part isn't like discovering new things. But every once in a while you hear somebody and you just kind of go, fuck, that's good. That's really, and I have no idea who I've just listened to. And that kind of drives me crazy because I would love it. It's like when there's an artist like a Keb Mo. The first time I heard Keb, when I finally met Keb, I just went, you're one of the few artists that the minute I heard you, I went and bought your album.
Yeah.
I said, I've got to support this guy because this guy's the real deal. And he's not a young artist by any means at this point, but you do hear these guys. I hate when people go, there's no good music anymore. I go, there's great music. There's wonderful music. I said, the real problem is the business.
It's no great filters, yeah.
Yeah, and you go, man, in the old day, if you were signed to a label, you knew where you were going to get screwed. That was like a given. But they had this machine that could get you airplay. They knew how to work it. They could get you into Peaches and Tower Records and all these places. So you had the chance to have your music be heard. But all of a sudden now we've entered a time where I work on some great records. And it's like working with that Laurie Basilio. She's a monstrous guitarist. She's right up there with the best I've ever heard, and she's got her own following going now. But it's hard for artists like that, to make it. And you just kind of go, I hate working on records where I get calls like a month later and they're going, any idea who we could call? Or they have no idea. And if you come up with a little shticky video or something that might get some scenes, on YouTube or Spotify. But you talk to people now and they got like 1 million hits and they're making $47. It's like, how do you develop your craft if you can't sustain yourself with your craft? If you've got to have other jobs and stuff to pay your bills, that's money I mean, that's time taken away from developing your skills. And clubs in town. There used to be tons of clubs in LA where you could go and play, and you could go in and play. Now, I mean, if there's a club, if you're a band, you're gonna be charged to play there.
Yep. And most of the great venues are now having like cover songs, or it's all cover music because they can
DJs.
bring drunk people in to dance that know Bon Jovi or something.
Yeah.
It's incredibly sad and difficult. An artist also not only has to have great songs, but then they need to know how to market themselves, edit, do all these social media platforms to get the music out there.
Yeah.
The labels, the majors especially, aren't going to sign you unless you have a monster following or you just went viral.
Yeah.
And they're going to bring you over to that label, try to recreate that with your own audience, and if it doesn't happen, they just drop you or shelve you. I mean, it's sad.
It's very frustrating.
You got to be creative though. Find new revenue streams. YouTube channels. What Scary Pockets did. They're not writing original stuff, but they're doing something very creative. Like they always used to say you could sell 20,000 albums independently, and it's exactly the same as selling 1 million on a label.
It's true. I mean, the frustrating part for me is I've dedicated so much energy. I mean, I've got, I think, like going on 1,600 videos up on my channel.
Wow.
But I don't make any money off my channel because everything's copyright protected.
Everything is.
Almost every. I mean, if I put up a video playing with my dogs every once in a while, because people love seeing my dogs, I can make a couple of bucks on it. But the YouTube channel, everything is blocked monetarily.
Yeah.
But that's not why I started doing it, so I don't look at it as a drag. It's something I really enjoy doing, and it gives me every day I kind of what it also did is it required me to address my career, which I had never done. Like when people would be interviewing me and they go, "So what songs have you played on?" You're going, "Oh God, I have no idea," But all of a sudden, I'm having to look at all music and all these different sites that have all this stuff, and I'm looking and I go, "I don't remember that." Then I'm digging them all up. Then I'm going, "Oh, I remember now. I remember that," and I'm trying to remember who was on the date. And I'm doing all this forensic studies, and then I'm playing along with songs that I haven't played in 45 years and stuff. It's been a real adventure for me, but it's been a really positive one. I've really enjoyed this, and not from a egocentric standpoint, but just you're living in the moment every day. And my world kind of like people have an image of me and they think of me from they've seen concerts. My skin is where my life ends, and all my impurities and all of my neuroses are all internalized. And I never gave a thought to what I've done. To me, the minute I finish a track and I'm out the door, I'm moving on to something else. Now, that's going to the audience, and they're going to disseminate it as they see fit. But I've moved on at that point, so I never thought about any of our history. If I'm in Home Depot and you've got a friend with James Taylor is being played over the PA, I go, "Oh God, that's great." I mean, it happens all the time, it's different things. But for the most part, I'm still hungry. I'm looking forward to the next thing. I've got half of next year's already booked solid and stuff. I'm thrilled about it. I'll be 77 years old, and I'm still out there having fun, loving what I do. I can't ask for a better situation than that.
Incredible. No, and that's also, I consult with producers and studios all the time, and they wonder why they're at a certain point when 5 years ago they were at number one. They're not relevant.
Yeah.
And also you have to utilize social media. It's sad, and it's toxic, and it's what can be toxic.
It's what it is.
Yeah.
What you make of it.
Yep.
I know so many guys that won't do like Facebook or back in there's so many different platforms now.
Yeah.
I like the minute all the shit started with Musk, I bailed on Twitter like instantly because I never liked it anyhow because I'm too wordy for that format. And Instagram, it's a lot of pictures and stuff, but I still put stuff up there. But a lot of people post pictures up from concerts and stuff. But I still find that Facebook is like the easiest one for putting up long format videos and things like that, other than YouTube.
Yeah.
But I've been out with the guys on the road, and nobody wants to do any of it. They kind of go, "Oh fuck." Well, when there was a kind of a precursor to this stuff, there was Scott Page, who was the sax player in Supertramp
and Pink Floyd.
Yeah, Pink Floyd. He started with some other guys. They started a lot of different high-tech formats, and one of the things they had was a company called New NBC, and one of the beta things they did was Toto on that, and it was when I was out with Toto, and I ended up administering the whole site for him and doing all the content because the other guys didn't care about this. They were kind of like Simon Phillips would go, I'm too busy. I said, I'm on the road with you. You're no busier than I am, and I have no problem doing it. So just say you don't want to do it. Don't give me this bullshit of the. So I was posting everything I wanted to do on it. At one point, I went in for a colonoscopy, and when you're done with those, they give you pictures of what your colon. So I posted those on their network, and I said, a lot of people say I'm full of shit, but here's proof I'm not. And they were going, why did you put that up? I said, because I'm in charge. Said, if you were doing something, then maybe you would have some say in this, but I'm doing it all. And it was just funny, but how so many guys I know, they don't want to touch this stuff. They feel like it's an invasion of their privacy. Or they go, I don't want them to know all about me. I'm going, you're talking to me on a cell phone.
Yeah.
Everybody knows everything about you. There's no secrets in this world anymore. So if you get over that, I just enjoy the interaction with people. I love, like I said, with the movie, doing the Q&As and stuff where some of the other guys aren't that thrilled doing the Q&As. And I go, I think it's great.
Yeah.
So you embrace, and with...
It's giving back, too. It's the fans that are
I
the
think
reason.
that's really important. But also just with these different formats, you make what you want of it. You don't have to like spill your guts all the time. You don't fall prey to every scam that's coming through. I open up Facebook all the time, and there's companies selling my image on T-shirts that I've never authorized, and so I have to go in there and write and say this is a scam. Don't buy this and stuff.
They do it to Sunset all the time, but we've got everything copyrighted, trademarked, and also a legal team here now. And people steal our show constantly. And Susan Rogers says beautiful things about Prince, and then they take that content, put music underneath it so it can't be fingerprinted, don't give us any credit, post it, monetize it, and then when they're like, oh, I'm giving you advertising. I was like, we don't need advertising. Like, this is a special thing that I don't even take sponsor money for. I just want to sit here and have a conversation with legends in these legendary rooms, and then they just steal the content. And try to, they're
really
not creative enough.
Me off.
It's ridiculous. There's someone like you who's, they're taking your image and making money off you. People are just bad. So let's go to another bass question real quick and we'll move along here. I know you got to go eventually. Do you want Pino Palladino question, or do you want Ali Futterer, the bassist of Wise Blood?
I'll take both of them.
Pino Palladino.
I love Pino. God,
I love him. He was in here for 3 months with us every day.
Oh, that's great.
Doing a iconic record that I can't talk about. But he asked if you ever change your strings.
Oh, it really depends if I feel it needs to be changed. I don't have like a schedule. Usually at the most, maybe once a year. Kind of that. I'm not a big fan of brand new strings. I use round wounds on almost everything I've got. I use GHS Super Steel, kind of a medium light gauge, which is 40, 58, 80, and 102, and then like a 120 something for the fifth string. But I like them when they've kind of settled in, and it's really not till like harmonics are starting to get affected that I'll maybe really look at putting a new set of strings on. But I don't think I've ever changed strings. Like on Frankenstein, that's my main studio bass and everything. If I'm having a really busy year, I might end up changing it twice, but odds are maybe once. And sometimes, I got a couple of basses that there's a few years on them, but they can tend to oxidize with time, and that isn't, to me, cool. It's just they just start to feel a little shitty even if you steal one. So maybe once a year.
Justin Andres plays bass for Eric Burden. He is begging. He said, please ask Lee for a story about recording One Man Dog with James Taylor in a cabin on a lake. One of my favorite bass albums. Did you record that in a cabin?
We did. That wasn't actually a cabin on a lake. That was James's house on Martha's Vineyard was being built at that time, but it was all wood, so it looked like a cabin, but it was a huge house on Martha's Vineyard. And what we did was we brought in a console from New York City, because this was out on the vineyard, or we brought it in from maybe Boston or something. We set up a console and some pictures up there, and we all just set up in this big room. There was no baffles, no nothing. And Jock McLean, who was our tour manager, and Peter Asher both engineered the album. Wow. And we just did that at James's house. But it looks like a cabin. And then the cover, I think, on that was James on a canoe with his dog,
his
David, his shepherd. on that. That was just a picture of probably taken on the vineyard on one of the little lakes there. But it was in James's house on Martha's Vineyard.
Do you drink alcohol?
No.
Smoke weed?
Nope.
Anything?
Never did anything.
Really?
I am the most boring cat in the world.
No, that's
I was
incredible.
a designated driver. Like when I was 15, everybody I knew was be drunk and stuff at gigs, and I'd make sure everybody got home and stuff. And I was around so much negative stuff, people on bad acid trips, people on heroin, and a singer that was our lead singer in a band I was in died of a meth overdose. And I just saw all this negative stuff, and I went, why would I want to do this? I'm too much of a control freak. I think if I was to get high, I'd fight it.
Yeah.
So for me, it's just easier to be, but I was never judgmental about it. If people can do what they want, I just didn't want to see people hurting themselves.
Yep. And also, I don't think that's boring at all. I love waking up early. And I think a lot of kids and younger artists are catching on to that. Like, even when they come in the studio, it's not like party time or, maybe
it's
someone
just
smokes a
work.
little weed, but other than that, it's, you don't see blow or it's,
Yeah,
I want to have a good life. And, how you live in your 20s is how you're going to be in your 30s, 40s, and onward. And look at you. You're, healthy, playing sessions every day, doing a YouTube channel. If you had drank your whole life.
Oh, no, I wouldn't be. I probably wouldn't be sitting here.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of the funniest things was back in the old days, we used to do a lot of things at Elektra Asylum Studios on La Cienega.
Yep.
And you'd go in, and it was all done in like Indian bedspreads and all. And we'd go in there, and I'd go, this lighting is for the playback, man. Can you turn on some lights in here? We're all going into a flat lining here because they had it set up in this groovy environment, and we're all sitting there going, oh, it's like, turn on the fluorescent lights. And we're at work. When you walk in that door, as much fun as this is your job, and you want to come in and give it everything you got. You don't want to come in. I always hated being around guys. I don't care what you do after the show, but in the show, I don't want to see drinking or anything like that because it affects everything.
Yes.
And I really like working in a professional environment. You talk to Luke, about how he feels about what he did back in his days of drinking and stuff as compared to how he performs and plays now. He was always a great player because I think he's one of those guys that was always going to be a great player. But just when he's there, with you, it's the best. You don't want to be dealing with this guy who, next thing you know, he's going to be hanging over your shoulder and you're going to be carrying him back to his hotel room.
Yeah, you lose too. That's when you booze, you lose. I think alcohol is just a demus. Alley Futter or Wise Blood. What do you practice on, Lee? Or when do you do practice? What do you do?
I've got a little setup at home in one of the rooms. I've got my laptop. I've got a Tascam little bass practice thing that you can plug into that has you can put a CD or run a direct line into that, and I have a small practice amp next to me and a Bose speaker plugged into the laptop. Like when I'm getting ready to go out on Lyle's tours, there's a challenge with that because there's no rehearsal for his tours. The first sound check is the rehearsal for the show.
Okay.
And so you've got to have about 70 or 80 songs under your belt because you have no idea what the set's going to be because there can be different songs added even throughout the show. If somebody calls out a song from the audience, he might go ahead and start playing it and you got to be there. So I just sit home, put on headphones and just play along. I don't actually technically, practice scales and things like that because I'm horrible at all that. It's just terrible. So I work on songs. And one of the things I do for relaxation, just to keep my chops up, our last tour with Phil Collins, I've got that. And if he called me and said, we're playing tonight, I could play the show. Because every week or two, I just sit and I play that show because it was so much fun to play.
Wow.
And that's kind of my practice is just running songs and learning material. And we've got some stuff we're going to be doing. Our band, The Immediate Family, we've got a Rock Legends cruise coming up at the end of February and about a half a dozen gigs in the Florida area. So I'm reviewing because we haven't played together in a long time. So I'm starting to review all of our material for the set that we're going to do. And then the week after that's over, then I'm doing this Chiamo cruise with Lyle Lovett and the Large Band. So I'm boning back up on all the Lyle stuff because we have different sets because we do symphonic shows. So there's songs that are in that with an orchestra that we don't do in the regular band. And we have the large band, which is 15 guys in the band. And then we do an acoustic tour, which is only 4 of us. So it's like, so that's all most of my practice is really just focusing on learning songs. And every once in a while I get really horny to play and I'll just plug a bunch of my effects in and do like Hendrix stuff, which I love doing, but I never nobody ever calls me to do that. I got to do kind of that when I was with Billy Thorpe and we did Children of the Sun. And we did that as a power trio, and I got to go out and go like giant bass rig that would fill this whole room and stuff, and it was amazing. But
Jaco Pastorius. What did you know him early on in life? You met him later.
I never got to meet Jaco.
Really?
I heard Jaco live. I saw Weather Report at Perkins Palace in Pasadena, which is no longer there. I mean, he was just like this remarkable musician. He just took things. It was interesting to me, like when Jaco hit the scene, all the cats in town were running home trying to play like Jaco. And I just sat back and I said, can't you just stop for a minute and dig a genius?
Yeah.
He's already done it.
Yeah.
So what's the point here? I don't feel competitive. Like when I hear Pino playing, I don't feel like I'm in competition with Pino, or I hear Nathan, or I hear any of the cats playing, or Jack Bruce, or you strive for your own signature. And when it comes to all those other players, I just want to sit back and enjoy them. The Abes and all these different guys. I just go, each person has their own thing, and I feel so fortunate to be a part of the community. Yep. Of musicians. I don't have to stand out. I don't have to do anything. I'm not Mr. Chops Monster. I look at YouTube and there's so many Chops Monsters, and some of them are like 3 years old.
Yeah.
I like hearing a song and responding to that song and coming up with a bass part that can bring something to that song. And it could be a fusion-y type thing like working with Billy Cobham, but it can also be working with, Linda Ronstadt or any of these people, Faith Hill. I played on Cry and, all that stuff. With Jaco, I just sat back and I went, this guy's so amazing. It only broke my heart that he was just such a tormented cat on certain levels that ended up costing him his life. Because you try to imagine what Jimi Hendrix would be like now had he lived. There's so many of these guys that died. Tommy Bolin, who I did Spectrum with, was dead. He was like 28 when he died, and you think, what? Tommy was 70. What would he be playing right now? So it's sad with Jaco when you look at the life of the guy, but the legacy that he left behind. You listen to anything he did early on, man, it is as timely right now as it ever was then. I mean, he's one of those guys that what he contributed will be there forever.
Why do you think? And you can go around every one of these rooms, from this room with Prince, to Studio One with Jim Morrison, Studio 2 with Eddie Van Halen, and on and on and on.
Yeah.
And almost all of them died very young from drugs. Why do great creatives have to go that route? Or why do you
they don't
think
have to.
They don't have to? Why do they get addicted to? Is it just initially enhancing ideas and kind of going somewhere outside of your normal self that they're attracted to, or is it just their rush?
Well, I think one of the things is most of these people were really young, and I think when you immediately start becoming successful, making money, getting adulation at those ages, you're surrounded with a lot of sycophants who are blowing smoke up your ass, and you start to believe some of your own press. And they're not necessarily the healthiest people to be around. Like when you see all the talk about like a guy like Justin Bieber, and this guy's such an asshole. He's like driving his Ferrari through the neighborhood at 100. Well, I mean, the guy's like a teenager and he's making millions of dollars, and he's probably surrounded with some pretty unhealthy advice from people, and nobody's willing to say no. So they're there to support you. If you start to get a drug habit, it's easy to get people to supply you drugs if you've got money. So I think a lot of these people fell to this kind of this trapment that this life leads. I mean, Elvis was in his 40s when he died.
Yeah.
I mean, here's this guy who had everything in the world going, but he's like so self-destructive because there's nobody. He had Colonel Parker there just, kind of feeding all of his illnesses, where the guys in the band who were trying to help him, they don't listen to them. They're kind of isolated off. So when you look at Jimmy and Janis Joplin and Jim Morrison, so they're living this kind of an aberrant lifestyle. And if they don't have it necessarily in their personal makeup to be strong through all of this, what's going on, it's easy to fall prey to all this because it's glamorized so much.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the hip thing. Gotta try this. I mean, there were so many things going on in LA where you'd be on sessions and you'd be sitting there for 3 hours because they're waiting for the blow connection. And then you'd see the budget for the album, and it would say miscellaneous, and that was all drugs. Yeah. It wasn't tape, it wasn't this and that, it was drugs. And for me, I found it boring to be around it because so many people, I found them really interesting. And then when they would get high, you'd get on a tour bus, and then the guy starts drinking, and the next thing you know, you got 800-mile drive, and there's a guy going, "I love you, man. I told you I love you.
Kill me now.
I'm gonna fucking kill you before this ride is over."
How could you do that?
But I love the music for myself, and nowadays it's easy. I mean, most of the people I work with, there's very few people get high. I mean, if they're still alive at this point, they're not getting high.
Yeah,
they might drink. I may have some. You look at the old writers and things, and it was all Stolish Naya and Jim Beam and stuff, and now it's like, do you want red or white? They're
green
drinking.
Juice.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. It's so, and for me, one of the greatest blessings ever was when they got internet on the buses. Because all of a sudden you got these long drives and you're not just sitting there, like with a VHS, hoping that the thing. Yeah, I can sit there and take care of all the stuff I need to do while we're driving down the highways. For the most part, some places are dead, Bermuda Triangles. But I think so many of the people that really, fell to the drug culture and alcohol and all that stuff. I mean, it was really sad. But you really can't tell them until they're ready to change. And a lot of them didn't survive. I buried so many people. I know more dead people than live people that I've worked with at this point. There's so many are gone. And you look at all kinds of acts, from the Harry Chapins to the Michael Hedges and all these different people. And they're no longer here. And it just saddens me because they had so much to offer.
Yep.
The Harry Nilssons and people like that. So.
Did you ever meet John Lennon?
Never met John. The only two Beatles I've ever had the pleasure of meeting is McCartney and Ringo.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it was funny. I was an usher at the Hollywood Bowl when the Beatles played there. So I actually got to hear the Beatles play live in '66. And then I met Paul in 1990 at Nebworth, this huge concert outside of London. And we were there with Phil and Collins and Genesis. But it was, Elton and McCartney and Page and Plant were there. I mean, Pink Floyd. It was one of these great things. And I walked into the canteen area, and there's Paul sitting there with Linda. And I just went, holy crap, it's him. And I walked up to him, and he goes, "Oh, Lee Sklar, I've always wanted to meet you." I went, "Don't do this." And then I've met Ringo a bunch of times, and we actually got to play together a while back doing this thing for Joe Walsh for his vet aid that he does. And we cut Funk 49 with Russ Kunkel sitting right next to Ringo, both like mirroring each other playing.
Too cool.
Waddy and Joe and Ben Montench and myself.
Love Ben Mont. Joe Walsh has 5 days booked in here, and
great.
Elton was just in here. In the next minute, think of a special Sunset Sound story you could share, but I want to tell you something, and I know you had a relationship with David Crosby. When I first came here, I started going through every little nook and cranny and up in the tape vaults and just documenting, finding old Polaroids and just looking through everything and investigating the studio, because I was like, we got to do a doc series, but it's got to be done right. And there might be something in the works, but it's got to be a series. You can't tell 65 years in 90 minutes.
Yeah.
But I found a bunch of photos of David Crosby and Joni Mitchell in Studio One. And David was producing her and dating her at the time. And it's Joni Mitchell sitting in the echo chamber. First record ever, Songs of a Seagull. And she's playing an acoustic. And it's just such an incredible artifact to have, to see that. Well, right before David passed away, he was in here making a record.
Yeah.
He'd come in for months. Since I've been here, he's probably made 4 records here.
Yeah.
And he's the first one to tell you all about all his flaws and drug habits and Studio Way. And Paul was talking to him. He'd call Paul, the owner, at home to book his session series. Like, hey, Paul, I need to come in. David, for 30 years, I've been telling you to call the front office. So,
David.
But I went up to him, and he's the kindest guy ever. And after a couple of years, I got to know him. And then I sat down and showed him all these pictures. And he hadn't seen them in 50 years. And it was just so special to be able to sit there and have an hour-long conversation and have him tell me stories about Joni at that time. And,
he's a great storyteller.
Exactly. What's a moment you hear at Sunset Sound that you remember, and it could be a song that you were so incredibly part of, or it could be a bass line that you wrote for a song, or it could have been when you played on Barbie Benton's record. Who knows? But
no, Barbie was great. Barbie was great. She made chocolate chip cookies for us. She was so sweet. I loved it. Like, I loved being here, like working with Manhattan Transfer, just hearing those four sing together.
Yeah.
You put the phones on and you just go, yeah. That's the shit.
Yep.
This is really good. There's so many. I mean, each project has had just its own little things to it. But I think, one of the things I really loved was doing Judith Owen in this room.
Just recently, too.
Yeah, it was.
Wow.
Well, it's been about. It was weird. She just contacted me and she said she wants to do a show in New Orleans next year that'll commemorate hers and my 10th anniversary of working together. And I went, 10 years now? I got to know Judith because I was working with her husband, Harry Shearer, and he had done an album called The End of the Bushmen. It was about the end of the Bush administration. It was a political satire record. And we were playing up at Blues Alley, or it's Blues or Jazz Alley, I forget, up in Seattle. And he said, my wife's going to sit in on a couple of tunes. And I had seen Judith, and she comes in and sits at the piano. Are you kidding me? I mean, she is such a beast. It's unbelievable. And afterwards, she said, look, I want to do an homage. My favorite period of time musically was that James Taylor Jackson period. She said her father was an opera singer with the Covent Garden Opera Company. But she said when we would do family outings, we'd be all singing James songs. And she said, I'd like to do a record as an homage to that period. And she wrote all these great songs in that ilk. And this is the room we came into. And it's like I said at the beginning, she was sitting at that piano and would play me, Waddy, and Russ these songs. She wanted the band. She said, do you think the guys would consider doing it? I said, I'll call them right now. And I called Russ and Waddy, and they both said, I'd love to do it. So, so we would come in here and we just knocked the stuff off, and we had Lenny Castro come in and do some percussion with us. But coming in, if it was 10 years ago, it feels like yesterday to me. When I walk into 2 and I look in that room and I still see Christofferson and Rita in there with their group of players and stuff, and David Anderle sitting behind the console, they all have this incredible meaning to me of sitting, in 1 and then going over into 2 and sitting in there and looking and seeing Corey Wells or Yazawa or all these different artists I've worked with over the years. These rooms just kind of exude those memories to me. There's nothing that's it was like a continuum of experiences.
Yeah.
I've never walked out of here going, that sucked. It was every experience I ever had in this complex has been great, and it's one of the greatest fears I have in my life is that we'll lose this room.
This place is doing incredible, and there's also all these new things that are coming about here. So it's like,
that's great.
I want to be here forever. Danny Korchmar emailed me and was a little upset, and I know you know him very well.
Yeah.
He's in New York, and he explained that he's a New York guy right off the bat, and I had never talked to him before. He had did some work on Dirty Laundry, Don Henley. You worked with Don Henley once or twice. Yeah. But when David Paich and Steve Picaro were in here, they had explained that they worked on that song, and apparently it wasn't accurate. So Danny called me up and was very pissed off about that. Yeah,
he's very possessive about it.
Yeah, and I said, hey, I just asked the questions. And he's like, oh, you should have done your research. And I just said, why don't we do an interview, and then you can come tell me your work. So
straighten it all out.
Yeah, he's going to come on next.
Oh, great.
Were you part of Dirty Laundry at all, or did you work on that track?
No. Most of that on that is Cooch created a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think I played on that. I mean, I did a number of things with Don over the years, but that was where Cooch and Don really came together and did that, because Don really wanted to get away from the Eagles at that point.
Yep.
Musically, he wanted to do something, and Cooch was the perfect foible for doing that. And Cooch was like, he loves techno stuff and all that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're in this band together, the Immediate Family. He's part of that, and we've been together, since 1970. Wow. I love Cooch, and he's moving back to Rhode Island. He's out here. He's been out here for a number of years, but he's going to uproot himself. I mean, he'll come in for when we have to do things. But I just spent the last 2 days. We did 4 hours each day of Zooms for the documentary film and the album coming out. So we were all
What network is that on? What network or what's the production company?
Magnolia
distributing.
bought the movie finally.
Gotcha.
Denny Tedesco directed it, and it's really amazing. It's called The Immediate Family. So on the 12th, which is Tuesday, I think it's coming Tuesday, it's being premiered at, I don't know, like 50 theaters around the country, and then on the 15th, it goes to general release and to streaming at that point.
So Tommy Tedesco was in the Wrecking Crew, kind of the leader, and then his son as the one that produced the Wrecking Crew film, which is so amazing. And now my friend Elmo Lovano from Jam Card is doing another film with him, and it's somehow based on, I think, Gold Star or the Wrecking Crew. I'm not sure, but have you heard anything about that?
I think he's got a couple of things going on.
Yeah, good for him.
I think he's doing a documentary about the great Wolfman Jack, too.
Wow.
Was one of the greatest DJs ever. So Denny's always, he's a really creative, interesting guy. So he's got stuff. Well, the Wrecking Crew was so logical because, of his dad.
Yeah.
He grew up with all those people. And to me, that's such a brilliant film. So we were completely blown away when we were approached to see about doing not a follow-up, but a kind of a continuum of our transition into what we do. And Ben, it was so flattering that they had no problem. Like almost instantly, everybody they asked to be interviewed, from Keith Richards to Stevie Nicks to James Taylor to Jackson Browne to Phil Collins, they all immediately said yes. He never had to go through their people. They just, oh yeah, please, and they're all in the movie and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
Did Carole King inspire you as a bassist?
Oh, of course. Yeah. She's still a remarkable. Quite a character.
She played on all that Joe Cocker, like Feeling All Right. I'm feeling all. That's her on bass.
Yeah. No, Carole
incredible.
was. And when you really have to think back to what it must have been like to be like really the only woman in those rhythm sections. There was a lot of women in the orchestral part of it, but when you look at the pictures of the Wrecking Crew in the studio and all those guys, there's this blonde chick in the middle of it. So she had to be a badder ass guy than all those guys, to put up with all their crap.
That's why
she's a great player, and her body of work. You look at her discography and you go, wow.
Yeah, she lives in Orange County. She's going to do this. I've been speaking with her.
She'll be tremendous.
I can't tell you how much this means to me. One, as a fan, but two, it's just it's special that you give your time to come in here and tell stories, and just you're so passionate and inspiring, and I just get a buzz talking to you, and it's for future bassists and people that are interested in these records and just hearing from you. So, what's your website again to get the book? And
for the book. For the book, go to lelandskalarsbeard.com. You can get that T-shirt with my beard on. And also, I was an artist through school. I've got a lot of artwork on there, museum quality prints that we're doing limited edition. But come to the YouTube channel. Just log in. It doesn't cost anything. And plus, I've got a clubhouse with it. We meet twice a month. I do
Sick.
and then when I've had this issue where my wife had this serious injury, but when she's back to normal. Again, I do a thing through the clubhouse too, a one-on-one thing once a month where I'll talk to people for like 15, 20 minutes one-on-one, and I'll be on FaceTime or Skype. And I love interacting with people. So, but come to the YouTube channel, it's just Leland Sklar. And there's about, I think today was 50. Let me check here and see which one today?
See, these take so long to do, and then you have to edit them. They're 3 hours long. It's like I want to do one a month.
Yeah, today is my 1,537th video on the network.
I have like a 180.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of stuff, and it's been fun. Some of these have had, like I play along with Susudio on that, and I think there's like 800,000 or a couple of million views or something on that. It's just fun. It gives me something to feel engaged every day with.
And it's an eternal library of things that you've created, even outside of, just the records you've played on. It's like somebody can learn about Lee Sklar and then in 30 years from now, go on this channel and, investigate around and see what you were.
That old dude.
Yeah.
There ain't no sanity clause.
Oh, are you staying you want to go talk to Alan Sides for a second?
I'll go give him a quick hello, and then I'm going to have to head home to check in on
right.
my. But at least her sister's visiting, so she's kind of taken over, so I could come in today. So it's good.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, my friend.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure.
And you get a free T-shirt.
God damn it! I knew there was a reason to come down here.